there's one thing Cyberpunk 2077 has to write home about, it is its vast cast of very well-written characters. The characters of this game are, at least for me, the reason why I have played through that game as many times as I have. In this video, I'll be going over many of the major characters featuring in Cyberpunk 2077's first chapter, exploring their histories and their in-game story. We'll also be exploring some theories and cut content pertaining to T-Bug, Militech, and Meredith Stout. Welcome to Shaped by Stories, where in taking a closer look at our favorite stories, we can better understand how they shape our own. Now, without further ado, here is the lore. Night City is full of gangs, just scraping by in the landscape of its moral half-life. But few market themselves as honorable and just. Few gangs carry themselves like a family, and few are as grandiose as the Valentinos. And it's rare to find a member who would throw their family under the bus. Jackie Wells exemplifies the core values of the Valentinos. He's loyal, protective, and as far as honor among thieves goes, Jackie is certainly up there, but he was grandiose as well. Grandiose in his emotions, and his love for those he cared about. Grandiose in his aspirations. And unfortunately, too grandiose for his own good. The Valentinos are a gang that protects the people of Haywood, and all the barrios populated by a predominantly Latino population. Jackie joined up young, and it is no secret of his mother's involvement in the gang. Jackie's own father was a member of the Valentinos, though from what Misty tells us, he was not exactly the ideal father figure. Jackie never had any real good things to say about him, and from what we can gather, his dad either died or left the family when Jackie was still young. Jackie's dad was not the best influence in his life. He was extremely close to his mother, Mama Wells. Her bar, the Coyote Cojo, is a beating heart in the Valentino nightlife scene, and there's no doubt that Jackie grew up surrounded by members of this gang. If anyone tried to cause harm to his mother, the Valentinos were there to smack him down. And the Padre, for as long as he's been in power, has been a present figure in Jackie's life. Jackie was a true son of Haywood, and it is no surprise that Jackie took up his guns under the Valentino banner. In a way, it's likely one of the only viable options he had, as yet another impoverished kid born in Night City. Despite his own feelings about his father, Jackie was beginning to follow in the man's footsteps. But he didn't want to be a repeat of his dad. Jackie had wanted to be a better man than the one who had left him and his mom behind. For young Jackie, the Robin Hood-esque ideals of the Valentinos would have been fascinating stories, ones that likely inspired him to grow up into the boisterous, bold, and good-natured guy we know him as. Once that youthful steam cleared, Jackie would have inevitably saw the truth, that no matter what he did, or what the Valentinos helped him make in a day, if he kept on this course, a course of unending firefights and turf wars with other gangs, he would be stuck in Night City forever. Jackie left the Valentinos as a young man and set his sights on becoming a Night City legend. He would aim higher than any Valentino before him and create a better life for those he cared about. While Jackie wasn't the most famous up-and-comer in the city, he had a lot of experience under his belt. Though this went hand in hand with an inflated idea of his own capabilities. He was not afraid to get his hands dirty and was smart enough to say no when things were too steep. We can see this when Jackie refuses to take on the job that Corpo V asks him to do in the Corpo Life Path intro. Like most Valentinos, Jackie hates the corpse that lord over people like him. The corpse and the broken system of Night City are what keeps people like him, the less fortunate and lower class, in the dirt. stuck where they are for the run of their lives with no hope of escape. The Valentinos chafe beneath the corpo hammer more than most gangs and present themselves with what material wealth they can get. When you're so used to nothing, showing off things you do have can tend to be a common reaction. Jackie's own display of this wealth in what he wears is a hint towards what Jackie probably feels he lacks. But despite the way Jackie presents himself, he knew from the get-go that corporations were powerful. And as satisfying as it would be to get one over them, even Jackie knew that their power was far in excess of the gang he grew up in. That is, until a certain fixer knew just what to say to get Jackie on board. Before we dive into Dexter Deshawn, we have to talk about Misty. Misty and Jackie grew up together in Haywood and went completely different ways from there. Misty is a standout in Night City, and not just for the nature of the business that she runs, but because of her own view of Night City. Misty wants to help the people of the city reconnect with their humanity. Her approach might not be fitting for most people, but Misty's heart is in the right place, and Jackie recognizes that. Misty has at least diagnosed one of the most common illnesses in Night City that makes it such a hellhole for the people who live there: a lack of humanity and connection to themselves. For Jackie, the Valentinos and his mother are his heart. But Misty, once he reconnected with her before the start of 2077, becomes his soul. I think Misty appeals to him because both he and her agree that Night City is a crappy place to be, and they both understand the dehumanization that goes on every day. But Jackie, even if he could leave, would choose to stay, because Jackie wants to care for his mother, for instance, and those still in Night City that he loves. It's a beautiful concept, but I think, sort of like David Martinez, Jackie has a way of putting others' well-being before himself. Jackie is already traveling a road of self-destruction, although it's not as easy to see it at this point. But Misty sees this. Misty wants Jackie to care for himself and take into account his own needs, beyond just wanting to aim high for fame and glory. Jackie is stubborn, and he blows this off more and more, because for him, he has all this riding on him. The happiness and safety of the people that he cares about, including Misty. And Jackie doesn't really listen to Misty, sort of like how David and Lucy did not exactly listen to each other. Jackie's enlarging dreams were becoming too large for him to ignore. A thing we learn from Misty after Jackie's death is that he promised he would take a bullet for her, even if it would kill him. And he means this, no doubt about it. Jackie was that kind of guy. Coincidentally, the event that led to him finally leaving the Valentinos was when he took 3 bullets right near the heart. He told his mom he was bulletproof after this, something she knew was just said to make her feel better about her son getting in danger all the time. Even though we don't know the whole story as to what happened with his dad, I get the feeling that he was not a dedicated father or husband. Jackie's dad was not present, even when he was there. And I think Jackie went hard in the other direction, determined to never be anything less than dedicated to the people he loved, to the point that it could harm him. Misty and Mama Wells, despite their differences, both try to sway Jackie from this outlook to no success. The other thing that Misty says is that Jackie was very different underneath his Jackster personality. Jackie was quite artistic, actually. He was thoughtful. He drew up that mandala in his own apartment after Misty recommended it, something she did not expect him to do, but was deeply touched to see after his passing. Jackie read classical literature, specifically For Whom the Bell Tolls by Hemingway, a book whose story, especially the ending, at least for me, ominously aligns with the end of Jackie's own life, and the zest for life that Misty, his own Maria, brought to him. One of the last things that Misty tells Jackie is to avoid mean red light, and during that final heist, as Jackie steps closer and closer to death, the lights around him in Arasaka Tower glow a bloody red. Dexter Deshawn may be a fool to most, but Dexter was smart enough to know that bullshit baffles brains, especially when it came to young, inexperienced, and pumped-up mercs eager for their big break. And this was how he made his name as a fixer. However, unlike Rogue and even Faraday to an extent, Dexter was also known for his screw-ups. We don't really know the specifics of what happened, but around 2075, a job Dexter took on went horribly awry, and this resulted in him lighting the fuse of a gang war that would engulf Pacifica. And Dex ran. He was gone for 2 years, hiding under whatever rock he could find. By the time he got back, nobody worth their salt even wanted to work with him. His name was ruined. So when Dexter DeShawn contacted T-Bug and from there started assembling a team for Evelyn Parker's heist, he was forced to face the fact that nobody in the afterlife would even look in his direction. He had to turn to the less desirable candidates in the solo world. To anybody else, they saw him for what he was: a fraud, a hack, a liar, and maybe even a coward. Dex's only option was mercenaries without a rep. Solos with more gumption than sense. Jackie Wells was the perfect prey. Dex made all these promises to Jackie, of money, of fame, of legend. All the lines that a guy like Dexter knew to say in order to secure the loyalty of a pawn. Jackie was susceptible to being puffed up and manipulated, and Dex knew it. Combined with Jackie's own impatience and a desire for glory, Dex had him in a death grip. But it also doesn't take long for V to see the true nature of Dex DeShawn. Dex even says to V that Jackie is not good at everything, not like V, with Dex being kind of like, nudge, nudge, you're better than your friend. Dexter is a rat from the get-go. Who knows what Dex says about V behind V's back, for instance? I think that the reason why Jackie is so desperate about this job is because he expected to be so much further as a mercenary than he already was. Maybe Jackie really isn't as good a merc as he wanted to be, and so he ignored everything he would have heard about Dex as soon as the too good to be true opportunity presented itself. As far as Jackie knows, this is the only way he can ever be something, and the only way he can ever provide for the people he loves. V was the real ticket in making this heist happen, even if to Dexter, V was just as much of a pawn as Jackie. And I think Jackie knew this too, and that is why Jackie was so desperate to get V on board. This was not going to work without V. In the end, both Jackie and V were just pawns. But for Jackie was far too tempted by this chance that he would not see the writing on the wall. Over the course of prepping for Evelyn Parker's heist, we see that Jackie is becoming bolder, more arrogant, and focused on the wrong things. Jackie is more focused on appearing tough than being smart. He is more focused on the reward than the delicate work they have to do to get there. In that same sort of Valentino presentation over precision that is common throughout members of his gang. Even Jackie's purchase of the bike with the money that he made from the Sandra Dorset job could have been used, for instance, to invest maybe in better cyberware or maybe in better weaponry. Jackie just sort of splurged. But all of this points to Jackie's own insecurities, his own brushing off of Misty and his mom, his own indulgence in the good things that are suddenly flying up at him, the foreshadowing of Jackie descending into afterlife, into this place of sin and excess, was a very good hint at how this was all going to go. At this point, we can already see that V is still taking this more seriously than he is. But deep down, despite all of this surface enjoyment, Jackie is still dealing with a deep sense of inadequacy. Jackie wants to be a Night City legend, and most solos like him do. It's the highest form of acknowledgement for anybody like Jackie in this city. After all, Jackie is just a kid from Haywood, a worthless ganger who has been told his whole life he will never amount to anything more than that. For me, Jackie is a lot like David Martinez from Edgerunners, and even Maine to an extent. All of these characters are afflicted by the battering ram that Night City just pummels people with from birth, that you are not good enough. You're not worthy enough. You're just not enough, period. The line that Jackie says to V in the car.
Let me explain something to you, V. My whole life I've spent in this shit around us. And I ain't going back.
Just speaks to the genuine hatred Jackie has for the unfairness of Night City. The squalor that nobody with the actual power to enact change would ever try to fix. Jackie never wants to go back to that, and he doesn't. But he doesn't want the people that he cares about to be stuck there either. When Jackie is fatally shot, I think he knows right then and there that that's the end of the line for him. He takes the chip and doesn't even think about the personal cost to himself in inserting it. This is Jackie's only chance to help his mother, to help Misty. He has to get the payment, even if V is the one to be the middleman for him in that case. At his core, Jackie is a good and loving person, but a person that, in his quest to become the opposite of his father, was slowly descending to the same fate as him, absent from the lives of the people that he cared about. V was the merc that Jackie always wanted to be, almost like a big brother or big sister kinda. But Jackie never let that envy sour their friendship. His Valentino heart was what made him see V as much the same as him, someone else lost in the Night City madness. Jackie is initially comfortable with the heist because of V's involvement. V is competent and smart, and Jackie values this in his friend. So far, they've been able to conquer a whole lot of jobs together, so why not this one? Or at least that's the line Jackie keeps telling himself. The only friction we really see between the two is at Konpeki, and this is demonstrated over V's questioning of why are you not taking this job seriously? V is capable of the things that need to be done if you want to be successful, and Jackie is not, and he knows this. I think another part of Jackie is also kind of upset of like looking at his friend and saying, you know where I grew up, you know what I had to go through. How can you not see why I want this so badly? Jackie, I think, is the type of person who, instead of taking out insecurities and perceived failures on other people, he internalizes them and just keeps battering himself with them. I think Misty was the only one who was able to crack into this hidden place inside himself and to help make him feel better, to give him some relief and to try and help him acknowledge that this is not healthy. But Jackie, despite everything, is extremely noble in his last moments. I think in knowing he's about to die, he knows he has to get V out. Number one, should his family need help or should Misty need help, V will be there. V will do it. But also I think Jackie feels a degree of responsibility for roping V into this job, because he did. And Jackie does love V like family. And I think understanding this responsibility is why Jackie takes the shard without hesitation in the first place, at least until there is no other option but to give the shard to V. Jackie never does go back to the squalor of his childhood. Jackie passes away in the Excelsior Delamain, his first real taste of luxury. Excelsior is a poem, actually, written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in 1842. Excelsior follows a story of doomed idealism, very fitting for the story and themes of Cyberpunk, but also for Jackie's character to a T. The luxury he had sought in his life was worthless, even as he lay dying upon plush, expensively upholstered seats, dying with his best friend trying to comfort him and remind him of the good things he had in life. Jackie regrets his last words with Misty, considering they were an argument about the very job that got him killed. Jackie regrets not being there to care for his mother. He regrets not being able to celebrate with V. But Jackie, in typical Jackie fashion, does not dwell. He passes the torch of his dream to V, the ticket that more or less saves V, the relic that brings V back from the dead, giving V a chance at a new, if shorter, life. Jackie's final wish is for V to carry the hope of a better life with them, that there is a better life than the one that they were both born into. That kid from Haywood, a son who strove to be better than his father, to the point that it ultimately led to his end. A fighter who dared to scratch above the meager goals of the gangs, and a man who loved to the lees, but ended up leaving the girl behind that he had wanted to spend his life with. An end not unlike his father, the man who Jackie swore to never be. For a character as minor as T-Bug, there is certainly some elaborate ideas about who she really is, as well as the full extent of her role in the heist questline. And I think this is because T-Bug is a substantial character who was unfortunately pigeonholed into an insubstantial role, largely due to the late-stage erasure of her plot relevance in Cyberpunk 2077. This isn't necessarily a bad thing because content inevitably gets cut and characters get rewritten. This is just a natural part of the creative process. But when that process is left unfinished, you can really feel the gaps in stories for characters like T-Bug. While I do think that the T-Bug we get in Cyberpunk 2077 is just who she presents herself as in I don't think there's any grand conspiracies to her, I also believe that a large chunk of the theories that I have seen circulating about her are onto something. We can see strong hints throughout the final game and its development cycle that the T-Bug we know is incredibly different from the T-Bug that we got. In exhuming the bones of this previous T-Bug, we see more than just interesting trivia hidden within the game's foundations. Rather, we can more fully understand the value of the layers of how a story is constructed, and how the human brain, whether or not we actively realize it, always notices old scars from the editing process that were, unfortunately, not given time to heal. First things first, we are going to take a look at who T-Bug is as we see her in Cyberpunk 2077. And sadly, there is not very much to go on. Our first potential look at T-Bug's past is through Rhino's Humans of Night City interview that you can find on CDPR's website. Rhino discusses her past work with a netrunner who always talked about retiring to an island in Greece, who also happened to be from Pacifica. Odds are this unnamed runner is probably T-Bug. In the same interview, Rhino describes a gig gone wrong in Pacifica that resulted in stirring the hornet's nest of the gangs of the district, as well as their fixer vanishing and leaving them to fend for themselves. If we put any stock in this interview, it's very likely that what is being described here is Dexter Deshawn's infamous Pacifica blow-up. The very job that ruined his career, sending him fleeing for the literal stars to escape the gang war that he had accidentally started. In 2077, prior to the heist questline, Dexter tells V that he owes T-Bug. We don't know exactly what he owes her or why, but I can't help but wonder if T-Bug perhaps helped Dex escape. For the next couple years, Bug continued her work as a mercenary, eventually teaming up with Jackie and V a number of times. T-Bug would always keep them at arm's length, never wanting to have anything more than a professional relationship with the mercenaries she worked with. But this didn't stop her from sharing her love for classical philosophy. This is one of T-Bug's more distinct traits, revealing a more scholarly side to this netrunner. I think T-Bug's love for philosophy is one of the few remaining traits from her original concept. One quote that she says is, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact," which she then says, "Marcus Aurelius, I believe." I think this is T-Bug's rare sense of humor, because there's a lot of scholarly debate about who actually said this quote, and a lot of experts believe it was not Marcus Aurelius who said it. Considering the context of the quote, and the way she attributes it to him with that "I believe," I think is meant to be her attempt at a punchline. this is probably the friendliest we see her with Jackie and V. And it's actually kind of sad. I think Bug just wishes that someone would understand her jokes, or that she had people she could just talk to, and a V with a high enough cool rating can encourage her to share more philosophy. I kind of believe that T-Bug is actually very lonely, because she's lived so cautiously for so long in order to stay alive. It's through T-Bug that Dexter Deshawn arranges a meeting with Jackie and V, recruiting them for the Evelyn Parker heist gig. As T-Bug is one of the few netrunners that Dexter has somewhat of a working relationship with. Which I will say, if Humans of Night City is in fact about T-Bug, it's a little weird that she would want to work with him again, especially after such a disaster. This could be a hiccup in the plot, or maybe there is information that we just don't know, as I think for this part of the plot it may have been decided that the reasoning was no longer relevant in the final version of Cyberpunk's story. We meet T-Bug in person, the first and only time, in a dingy back room at the Afterlife. Sealed up in a soundproof booth, it is here that the final plan for the heist is settled. The fact that V and Jackie have never even glimpsed her in person is just another symptom of Bug's extreme caution. She has spent so much time and energy to keep herself safe. It says a lot about how invested in this job that she is physically there. After Dexter Deshawn leaves the meeting, V can then ask T-Bug a little bit more about what she wants out of this heist, and even thank her for her help on previous missions. T-Bug is polite, but you can tell she doesn't do her work for gratitude. She reveals her plan to get out of Night City for good, with her sights set on a sleepy retirement on a Greek beach. When V jokes about exchanging postcards, Bug is frank with them and admits that she will be cutting ties with everyone in order to start her new life. Which, to be honest, I totally understand, because T-Bug has spent so much time and energy working towards her goal of leaving Night City. She has purposefully never gotten attached to people so she could keep her focus. Maybe philosophy actually helped her stay sane in Night City after seeing countless people around her get wiped out. Either way, T-Bug, V, and Jackie nearly carry out this heist with flying colors. Nearly. On the way to the plaza, T-Bug says a quote from Aristotle: "The greatest crimes issue from a desire for excess, and not from necessity." This line almost feels like it's supposed to be said in a way that savors the group's expected success. Everybody except maybe V is eager because they're right on the cusp of wealth and fame. For T-Bug and Jackie, they're about to achieve their dreams. But this only serves as a sour hint towards the grim fate awaiting the trio at the top of Konpeki Plaza. T-Bug helps Jackie and V through the tower, only to be fried when Arasaka countermeasures flood the tower network, after being set on lockdown after the surprise murder of Saburo Arasaka. We find out from the owner of the net running shop that T-Bug can actually send us to as part of the early game net running tutorial bit, that she was found dead in her apartment with her nervous system fried. It's actually really easy to miss this line. In regard to Bug's method of death, some people think she was soul killed. I personally don't think she was, and that's mostly because Soul Killer, even in its earliest renditions, at least leaves the body temporarily alive while wiping out the brain. In Bug's case, according to that easily missable dialogue option with the owner of the Netrunner shop, her nervous system was entirely fried, which to me implies literally electrically fried, meaning she was dead. Granted, if it was Soul Killer, maybe her body died after being left alone for who knows how long. But insofar as I know, if your entire nervous system is fried, brain stem included, your functions are also gonna have to cease, I think. I'm not a neurologist, so I could be wrong. I also just don't think Arasaka would risk having that platform deployed in their subnet for potential enemy runners to witness. It feels a little risky because it's a valuable weapon. Maybe I'm wrong, but Soul Killer for me just doesn't add up. Some people also theorize that Bug escaped, and I also don't believe this. Maybe in a past version of the story, she would've, but the Bug in this version of the story is not as skilled as she may have thought she was. We can see this in how many hours it took her to crack the tower network, and how exhausted and stressed she sounds after the fact. I think, like Jackie, she bit off more than she could chew, and she paid the price. I think in the end, this is the point they decided to make with her character. Just another casualty of trying to get out of Night City and believing they were better than they actually were. And that is that. That is the actual end of T-Bug's story, and I don't think she's ever mentioned again. I don't think T-Bug even gets a columbarium entry. She's kind of just forgotten and swept under the rug. You could argue that this is sort of realistic. In Night City, people die every day. I'm sure this isn't the first merc that Jackie and V have worked with that has been flatlined on the job. But the thing with how T-Bug's story is handled is that it just feels awkwardly blunt. And sometimes a blunt ending in a story is the result of a plotline that couldn't, despite intentions to the contrary, be fully told. And I think that in T-Bug's case, this is one of those unfortunate times. The first time T-Bug was introduced was during the 2018 Cyberpunk 2077 E3 trailer, where you can see her briefly taking out an Arasaka Corpo. While we can't exactly view this as canon, what's interesting is the marketing that included T-Bug. She appears in the gameplay demo of the same year, and perhaps most interestingly and most prominently in the 2019 E3 cinematic trailer, where instead of being dead from the events of the Konpeki heist, T-Bug is very much alive. And also, she seems to betray V in favor of Dexter Deshawn. The other thing, too, that I think is interesting is the fact that T-Bug had a cosplay guide at this time, which doesn't seem that interesting, but I used to do a degree of professional cosplay before I did YouTube. And usually, companies don't release cosplay guides for really minor side characters like T-Bug. And the cover of this cosplay guide also includes T-Bug holding her jacket, which we cannot see in the final game, and this is the same jacket she wears in the cinematic trailer, and in my head, to me, that means that at that point when they made the cosplay guide, T-Bug did have a more prominent role in the story, she had a slightly more unique design compared to some other netrunners. But now, if you go to CDPR's website and look at all the cosplay guides they have for Cyberpunk characters, they no longer have T-Bug up there, unless I missed it. It's such a small thing, and it could just be nothing, but to me that stands out. Bug was a noticeable part of the game's promotion, and the way that she was used in the marketing implies that she had more of a presence in the final game, or at least one that would stick. Of course, T-Bug's prominent featuring in the 2019 trailer could just be something that was included to not fully disclose the full story of Cyberpunk. But if that was the intention, it feels odd that they would choose to portray one of the most important story moments of the whole game, V's murder and then revival with Keanu Reeves in their head. If anything, it would make more sense if they didn't have T-Bug in the trailer. It would feel weird to just add somebody betraying you and then having them in the game not. Versus the other way around, where it would make more sense taking somebody out who would be key in a betrayal to hide the spoiler. It's that kind of logic that makes me think that T-Bug was in fact intended to betray you right there, but something changed. And last but not least of the points that I want to mention about T-Bug's development is her initial concept design. I think it's important to always take note of concept art and character design, as they are a medium for telling a story. And T-Bug's initial design bears a lot of similarities to the same style used by the Voodoo Boys, specifically their netrunners. There's similar layering of jewelry and clothing, as well as some markings that resemble Voodoo Boy Loa marks. The presence of this design faded throughout development, to the point where all that was left was T-Bug's jacket, as we see in the cinematic trailer. By the time the game was released, even that was gone, and I will say I'm kind of sad about that because the jacket was cool. But my overall point with all the things that I've mentioned in this section is that there are some strong signs that T-Bug was meant to have a lot more depth than she ended up having, and that she was not meant to be forgotten just for the convenience of the plot. The one thing that I do think is certain about T-Bug's initial story is that she was going to betray Jackie and V. The setup of her past with Dexter Deshawn, as well as her talking with him alone in the afterlife, combined with her aloofness, all hint towards a more ruthless side, perhaps hidden motives. It was a great setup for that kind of twist anyway. One other thing to note about T-Bug's professional interactions with Jackie and V is that they feel a little warmer after they begin the heist job. And while in the final game, I think this can be safely attributed to nerves or excitement for their dreams coming true, it can also be seen as a touch manipulative depending on how you frame it. If T-Bug was intending to betray them in original iterations of the story, this would fit. And I also think that T-Bug was initially meant to be a voodoo boy, or at least a past member of the gang. As a netrunner and Pacifica native, she would have, at the very least, had to have had run-ins with the gang. Her design is one of the major things that makes me think there is a connection here, but even I'll be the first to admit, I could be wrong. Part of me even wonders if Dex's disastrous job that set off that gang war in Pacifica was a gig from the Voodoo Boys, who framed their desire for a gang war as a simple theft job. Maybe the Voodoo Boys sent T-Bug to Dex under the guise of trying to help him, when her true purpose was to ensure that this gig went exactly how the Voodoo Boys wanted it to go. According to Rhino, this gig particularly antagonized the animals, who are the #1 rivals in Pacifica to the Voodoo Boys. From what I could find in the lore, the Voodoo Boys didn't gain the power they hold over Coastview all that long before 2077, and this period of unrest with the gang war that Dexter Deshawn apparently started could have been when they seized more power. Maybe this was when they moved into Batty's hotel. I also just think it would be very funny and fitting if Dexter had just been played this whole time. I also can't help but wonder that if T-Bug was in fact intended to be a voodoo boy, was she potentially a plant in the heist gig to ensure the Voodoo Boys got the relic? It always seemed a bit odd to me that the Voodoo Boys apparently didn't know that Evelyn was planning a heist, even after we see a brain dance of Maman Brigitte regarding that Evelyn is too smart for her own good. It just strikes me as a remark that doesn't get said and just thrown away, and I feel like initially, the Voodoo Boys had kept an eye on Evelyn in the same way that they kept an eye on V when V was in the GIM. I doubt that was the first time that the Voodoo Boys decided to supervise an outsider. In fact, the whole setup of Evelyn's heist is the perfect cover for the Voodoo Boys to get the relic, rather than them planning their own. Evelyn was deliberately planning this behind their back, and she assumed that they had no idea. If the Voodoo Boys had been watching Evelyn, I doubt that she ever would have figured it out. With Bug there to secure the relic before Dex or Evelyn could sell it to the highest bidder, the Voodoo Boys would almost certainly get the relic. It would make Evelyn's fate even more brutal, because that meant that she was truly and completely played from the start. And it would better tie in the Voodoo Boys, a faction that is extremely and uniquely fleshed out, to the grander scheme of the story. In the final game, at least for me, considering the amount of work that went into creating the Voodoo Boys, they almost feel sort of wasted. Granted, maybe they just went really hard with the world building in Pacifica, but it does seem a little odd that if you look at the Voodoo Boys in the tabletop version of Cyberpunk, they are completely different from the 2077 version of the Voodoo Boys. It's really interesting. It feels like the kind of change that you would make only if you intended to actually use this faction for something more than just a couple quests. I think in this potential timeline, T-Bug was a very capable netrunner, as one of the primary types of gigs that Voodoo Boys do involves breaking into corporate data forts or subnets. It's dangerous work that few specialize in, and the Voodoo Boys are one of the few. I think Bug would have stayed on the line with V and Jackie for as long as was safe for her to do so, solely to help preserve the relic so she could nab it. I also think that T-Bug's goal to take the relic and give it to the Voodoo Boys would also exclude Dex. I don't think Dex would have been made privy to this plan, because I think Dex's #1 motivation is money, and the Voodoo Boys don't want the relic for money purposes. They certainly would not be giving him as big a paycheck as, let's say, Netwatch would. And so I do think that T-Bug was initially meant to be in the no-tell motel, waiting to potentially betray everybody in order for her to get the relic. But as we see in the trailer's events, this does not go as planned, and T-Bug gets shot in the face. Now, whether T-Bug would have died in this motel room or not, I am not sure. On one hand, at least her story ends here in a more final way, with her betrayal still being impactful. Maybe we would have found out about her true allegiance further down the line as we got closer to the Voodoo Boys. Or maybe she would have somehow survived, with terrible injuries and disfigurement, of course. Maybe the tension that we feel with Placide in the Voodoo Boys questline was a tension that was maybe meant to be felt towards seeing T-Bug again. After all, it would have been a compelling reason to choose a more violent end to the gang, on top of being used and fooled by them. Maybe Bug would have expressed regret about Jackie's death and how badly everything went. Maybe we would have had the option to show forgiveness and let her go to Greece and live her dream. Or maybe T-Bug was intending to betray the Voodoo Boys too. Maybe she planned on selling the relic to Netwatch, so she could flee to Greece and live out her dream for the rest of her days, only to then get fried by Netwatch, or maybe the Voodoo Boys a la Evelyn. I'll be the first to admit that this is all speculation, but T-Bug would have been the perfect thread to bind the Voodoo Boys more snugly to the main storyline, as well as be a compelling point on V's journey as a character. Do we take revenge on T-Bug, or do we let her go? I like the idea of T-Bug potentially living on and eventually going to the place of her dreams, only for that trip to be spoiled by the guilt that racks her. It would hit particularly nicely, especially if you could argue that T-Bug was genuinely developing some friendship feelings for Jackie and V. It would be fun to argue if this was her being manipulative or if this was genuine. Ambiguity, when done correctly, can be awesome, or in the case that we find her dead in her net-running chair, fried. We could at least get some very deep closure for a character who was willing to sacrifice everything to escape Night City, only to be completely wiped out because of it. But it's just such a shame that instead of this neatly surged plotline, whatever it could have been, we got a frayed edge instead. Could my whole theory be wrong? Absolutely, and I am willing to say it's likely. The only way to really know the full story of T-Bug is to have been a fly on the wall of that writer's room. But the point of me presenting my theory isn't to change what you might think of T-Bug, or to convince you of what her initial story was. In fact, if you want to, I want you to tear this theory I've presented apart, or post your own theory. Go nuts. Aside from the fact that that is always a genuinely fun discussion to have, the existence of all of these theories that pertain to T-Bug and who she was supposed to be is the point of this video. The sensation of blunt erasure in a story can worm its way into our heads far more effectively than a well-written mystery, with hints appropriately peppered throughout a huge story. Our brains are question-asking, answer-seeking generators. And while sometimes this can take us in completely off-base and pointless directions, a lot of the time, questions like who T-Bug was don't come from just a random place. A lot of the time, these questions do come from our brains, noticing abnormalities in patterns. And stories are patterns. There is a science behind it. For me, T-Bug's existence is almost like a parallel universe situation, where the two layers of her are sort of struggling to coexist, where only one can. This sort of phenomenon is present throughout a number of quests and characters that we encounter throughout Cyberpunk 2077. And this is largely due to the many plot surgeries that occurred late in development, where all there was time for was band-aid solutions. When a story is gutted and amputated and then stitched back together, the scars on that literary corpse are very obvious. And that's normal, because that's part of the creative process. Writing is rewriting, to quote Stephen King. For the majority of creative people, even the most skilled creators, the first draft is never the last. And because of that, the layers of revisions and polishing that follow are essential for blending each group of changes into the overall story. That time period is essential, even if it might be the most boring. Good things take time. Without enough time and care to let the stitching and suturing of the drafting process heal, changes and cuts and additions can stick out like a sore thumb. Time is money, people say, and this is why many things in our modern society are rushed to market before completion. While sure, it might cost more money the more time you put into something, the more time you put into something can make something worth more money. And stories are all about investment of a particular resource that you cannot buy, and that is time. Maybe if T-Bug had held herself back, just for a few more years, and worked smarter, not harder, perhaps her dream of Greece would not have become a tragedy. I suppose you could say the same for her overall story, but unfortunately, we will never know the whole truth. Perhaps this could inspire someone to tell a story all their own, inspired by a desire to fill in these blanks. It's just a shame that whoever this character was before was buried in a shallow grave. And I almost feel like T-Bug herself has the answer for why this happened. As this netrunner once said, the greatest crimes issue from a desire for excess, and not from necessity. A dream can take you anywhere. It can lift you to the heights of your own version of success, to the life that you always pictured for yourself. Comfort, stability, fulfillment. Dreams can come true, but dreams can drag you to the depths of hell, down the road of exploitation and abuse, into shadows of despair. Delusion is one hell of a warden, and once it sinks its claws into you, it does not let go. Most give in, but some still dare to dream. But in the end, hope and belief in the wrong idea can lead you to just as dark a place. Evelyn Parker was a girl with a dream. Perhaps she was born in Night City. City of Dreams, they call it. A hopeless place to begin with. In a childhood likely just as difficult as anyone else's in Night City. Evelyn's dreams may have been shaped by the neon lights and vibrant posters. In a city full of pretenders, Evelyn wanted to be the most glamorous among them. A famous actress. Someone who escapes into a false world. An illusion, if a short-lived one. For a moment you can mantle the life of someone else, step into their shoes, and forget the hell of your own. A life of glamour, money, safety and beauty, built atop a mountain of blood money, squalor and death. A world of delusion, on the job and off. We will never know the whole truth of Evelyn Parker's story, but this is likely how her life started. And while Evelyn would never achieve the theatrical audience she had dreamed of, she would enchant the most significant pair of eyes with the dream that she had, this need for delusion to help her survive. Her own. Evelyn carries her childhood dream to its first stage of fruition at a brothel called Clouds. Clouds is owned by the Tiger Claws, one of the most vicious gangs in Night City. As a doll, she was used by her patrons to fulfill their fantasies, her booth the stage, and her as the headlining actress of her own miniature show. Dolls are programmed to forget everything they are paid to do by their clients, or so we are told. We can see that not every single patron was there to treat the dolls with respect. Evelyn likely had to endure traumatic experiences, selling her body to the desires and whims of whoever paid for her. She was subject to whatever they wanted. Clouds is marketed as a cut above places like Lizzie's, though not for the workers. The Mocks protect their own, and although they're not perfect, they're still far above the gold-wrapped exploitation that goes on at Clouds. While we can see through V's own experience at Clouds, yes, the workers do tend to forget their immediate experiences with their clients. This is only at the client's use of their own unique safe word. The dolls have no such protection. Bosses like Woodman refer to their workers as the dolls, rarely by name. Names are used like a serial number or a product code. Even the term doll is objectification, dehumanization. The only protection offered to the dolls working at Clouds is based on how much they bring in to their Tiger Claw bosses. A line that V says while rescuing Sandra Dorset comes to mind, that while those left to lie unconscious in a tub of ice after having their body parts ripped from them don't remember this experience, they do suffer sudden, violent attacks at the merest hint of cold. I can't help but wonder if Evelyn's life was much the same, that beneath her own defense mechanism of reminding herself that she would eventually get to the movies, to respectable BDs, she would shiver at the sound of a belt unbuckling, or break out in a cold sweat at the lightest brush of her cheek. If so, Evelyn hid it well. Even if Evelyn never made it to the movies, she was quite the performer, certainly good enough to enchant one of the world's most powerful people, Yorinobu Arasaka. Like every other corporation in the Cyberpunk universe, Arasaka plays dirty. While the right hand of the company knows to play the facade, to act respectable, intimidating, and professional, the left hand has its feelers on the seedy underbelly of Night City. One of those fingers is the Tiger Claws. While never officially backed by Arasaka, rumors abound of a financial stream that finds its end in the Tiger Claws' coffers. It's likely that Yorinobu's own connection to the Tiger Claws is what led him to Clouds. Or maybe he requested the best of the best from the gang's club. And Evelyn was, as many throughout Cyberpunk note, the best at what she does. Excellent at playing her part. Evelyn managed to enchant Yorinobu with her cleverness, her beauty, her confidence. Even if it was all manufactured, this was Evelyn at her best. Here, she was able to thrive. Without the use of her doll chip, she didn't have to connect to any system, and she wasn't required to forget her dalliances with Yorinobu. For a time, Evelyn was almost able to live a part of her dream, considering the part she was now playing was, to date, her biggest role. She was the main event in this scenario, whenever she was called, and I think it's safe to say that the money she would have been making at this point was enough for her to quit Clouds, at least for the time being. But even Evelyn knew that this was ultimately not her happy ending. Like any other object in Night City, how long would it be before she was discarded too? Just another toy of another corpo, worn out and tossed away. Evelyn Parker was not stupid, so she probably knew that to refuse the Voodoo Boy's offer was akin to holding a gun to her head and pulling the trigger. Evelyn met with Maman Brigitte and accepted the job to record the BD of Yorinobu's penthouse. But Evelyn, smart as she was, showed her hand a little too early. She revealed to Brigitte her knowledge of the relic. Like Yorinobu, Evelyn talked a little too much for her own good. Even she knew that the Voodoo Boys considered her too smart a pawn to completely trust. Evelyn was already in danger here, beyond the fact of simply being an outsider. That alone was what saved her from the Voodoo Boys, as they misjudged her, until they realized just how smart a pawn she was. Evelyn was already being dragged into a vortex of gang and corporate warfare at this point, all because she was a girl with a dream who had ended up in a dead end at Clouds, in this city of broken dreams. At this point, I think Evelyn realizes that her dream is not going to happen, and she had two numbing realizations about how her life was about to go. The first being the all-too-likely fate of being discarded, of death, a fate she would have likely met anyway, after a life at Clouds. After all, how long before the claws wore her out and tossed her away? How long before the next favorite doll came into the dollhouse? And I doubt Evelyn would have been interested in working hand in hand with the claws. Maiko was not free, after all, and Evelyn wanted out completely. The second realization that Evelyn has was that she had a sliver of a chance to make it big. A bright, ensnaring sliver. Perhaps it wasn't even an illusion of hope, but a true chance at a comfortable life, somewhere far away from Night City. One where she no longer had to submit herself to exploitation and abuse, just to survive. Where her old dream was now a dead end, a new one leapt up in its place. Because what other choice did Evelyn have but to lay down and wait to die? Even if Evelyn had just delivered the Voodoo Boys the BD and left it at that, I think they still would have come after her, just in case. Evelyn really had no choices here. Used to being center stage, Evelyn makes her decision, though what hope she may have started with was quickly replaced by the lies she would tell herself, that she was prepared, smart enough, clever enough to game not just one gang and not just one of Night City's most popular fixers, but one of the most powerful corporations in the world. And even if Evelyn had left Clouds by this point, her head was still in them. Evelyn reaches out to Judy, one of the dearest people in her life, after an implied time of little to no contact, once she got swept up in the glamorous life of being Yorinobu's latest companion. Maybe Evelyn was so entranced by this mirage of life that she chose to forget everything she was to fully enjoy it, including Judy. Judy used to work at Clouds before the ugliness of the establishment became too much to bear. Now a member of the Mox, Judy is an extremely righteous person who wants to do everything she can to protect the weak, to the point of angering some of the Mox that she now works with. Judy is unfortunately naive. And while Evelyn does love Judy, the extent of which being difficult to unravel, as even the game directors of Cyberpunk 2077 have said that they intended to leave Judy and Evelyn's relationship a bit ambiguous. Evelyn uses Judy's naivete against her for her own needs, as well as what I believe to be Judy's love for Evelyn. There is an implication that Evelyn intends to leave Night City with Judy, but when it all comes down to it, Evelyn needs Judy in order to pull this heist off. Evelyn does live to regret the misuse of arguably her closest friend, and her own willful blindness in the danger that she was putting Judy and the Mox in. The Mox who were willing to protect Evelyn. Even before everything went downhill for Evelyn, we can see that Evelyn was deceiving herself. Evelyn constructs one of the grandest, most disastrous plans in Cyberpunk 2077, in which she aims to come out on top. This is the plan that gets so many people killed and results in V's ultimate crusade. Without this plan and all the troubles that spew out of it, we would not have the bottleneck from which the events of 2077 erupt. And while Evelyn's plan was shaky from the start, we can see that Evelyn was sharper and cleverer than everybody she worked with gave her credit for, at least for the time being. Yorinobu had made the mistake of blurbing about the relic that he had stolen from his father, enough that Evelyn knew of his plan to sell it to Netwatch. Its potential value was only compounded by the Voodoo Boy's interest in it. Evelyn couldn't resist, confident, and I do believe rightfully so in this case, that Yorinobu would never have suspected her. To Yorinobu, Evelyn was a beautiful courtesan, so to speak, not a lady with a big, meticulous plan. Evelyn even sneakily probes about his apartment, trying to dig up all the information she can on the relic and what Yorinobu's up to. He's none the wiser. And when it comes to Evelyn's brain dance that she was to record for the Voodoo Boys, we know she agreed to do the job, but we don't know if she ever delivered this brain dance to them. Perhaps she did, and that is why she was so restless in trying to get this heist off the ground. And if she didn't, perhaps she was trying to string them along and she knew that that would not work forever. She used the Voodoo Boys' underestimation of her own capabilities against them. And Evelyn's choice of fixer, being Dexter Deshawn, is a sign of her good judgment rather than bad judgment. Throughout the game, we hear multiple people ridiculing Dex. People across the board warn us about him, and about the heist we're planning to conduct. Even if you rat out Evelyn to Dex, you can tell by the way he laughs it off that his ego is extremely fragile and that he is not as clever and cool as he presents himself to be. Evelyn knows this. While Dex may have questioned what was going on with Evelyn, I think it's unlikely that he ever would have unraveled the whole truth about her on his own. Evelyn knew there was a chance she could play Dexter and any random mercs that he would likely hire, potentially inexperienced and easy to manipulate. Evelyn reveals as much during her first meeting with V at Lizzie's, when she discusses how, of the two types of fixers, Dexter is the unpredictable one, the disorganized one, the chaotic and arrogant one. But in Evelyn making her offer to V, cutting Dexter out entirely, shows that her judgment is not perfect, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better either. Not since her screw-up with Brigitte. She reveals her plans of betrayal to relatively a complete stranger. And you could attribute this to her own nervousness and impatience, considering what is at stake for her, but this is one of her fatal flaws in this whole mess. Evelyn also more or less reveals her intention to sell the relic to Netwatch, as Yorinobu planned to do. She would be screwing over the Voodoo Boys, Arasaka, Dexter Deshawn, V, and pretty much everybody involved in this. Even the Mox and Judy, considering the catastrophic fallout that could and would result from this. Imagine if Arasaka was able to track Evelyn down all the way back to Lizzie's. What would happen to the Mox, and what would happen to Judy, as Judy fears? As smart as Evelyn is, she does not possess the foresight of some of the more veteran characters in the Cyberpunk universe, who can point out a stupid plan as soon as they see it. This includes Rogue. Rogue, who Evelyn offered the job to first. Rogue rejected the plan because Rogue could see the writing on the wall. Rogue, who owns the bar that Dexter Deshawn operates out of at her good grace. Rogue, who is now anything but her namesake. Wise in the ways of recognizing when a job is doomed. One of the most important moments of Evelyn's character is when you're sitting in the booth with her at Lizzie's. Evelyn ambles along behind the hologram of the dancer, naked, exposed, there for the pleasure of the customer, while Evelyn, the woman, frightened, desperate, paces behind her. The skin, the commodity, a transparent shield for the desolation that lurks within. Evelyn dresses like the movie star she once dreamed to be. She even speaks with the cadence of an aspiring actress, the purposefulness. And even the way she speaks gives her away as deceptive. It's all a little too manufactured, like her image. Evelyn was not as good an actress as she thought she was. I think Kari Wahlgren did an amazing job portraying Evelyn here. The fact that she was able to portray a woman who wanted to be a movie star, who wanted to be an actress, who definitely has some passion for it, but you can see that she was not that good, and you can see the cracks in her facade. It's so sad and so well done by Kari. Despite Evelyn's tone and her carefully selected words, she becomes more impatient and rushed. Throughout our first meeting with her, Evelyn paces. She taps her leg. She can't sit still. Her clock is ticking and she knows it. When Evelyn speaks of Yorinobu, she is almost lamenting his intelligence, his good qualities, and his desire for independence. And this is an implication as to how Evelyn feels about herself. Somebody who was capable and meant for more than the hand life dealt her. Somebody who, even if they've tasted the good life, has nothing of their own. Ironically enough, in Evelyn's pursuit of myriad identities to be played out on the screen, was left with not even one. Evelyn's whole life is pretending to be someone else for someone else. And Evelyn's final line in regards to this, to the kind of person Yorinobu is, that she is.
Yes, because he's fallen for the biggest lie this town puts forward. That he can gain and retain control of anything.
She says while peering sadly at the holographic dancer, dancing to a tune that nobody but Evelyn can hear. When the heist goes belly up, I believe Evelyn knew her time was coming. I believe that Evelyn returned to Clouds not just to survive or go under the radar, but to protect Judy and to protect the Mox. Evelyn knew that the jig was up. The Voodoo Boys would have known about her heist. Who knows how long it would be before Arasaka figured it out. I would assume Arasaka hadn't figured it out because of the Tiger Claw affiliation with Arasaka, so perhaps Yorinobu did not suspect her. Evelyn knew that her entire plan had burnt down to nothing around her. Stuck in the graveyard of Night City, she went back to Clouds, not only because she had no other option, but because if anyone else around her was to die in the process of her own murder, Evelyn would never be able to forgive herself if Judy was collateral, or that the gang that had protected her could be potentially wiped out. A gang that gives hope to people forced to exploit themselves to survive. Evelyn took herself out of Lizzie's and stuck herself right back into the claws of their enemy. And the Voodoo Boys did find her, as I think Evelyn expected, and they did ruin her. The fate Evelyn suffers before her rescue at V and Judy's hands is worse than death. A fate suffered by far too many people before her and still to come after her. People who dared to dream only to end up in an absolute hell. When V and Judy find Evelyn, Evelyn is a speechless husk. Every bit of the beautiful woman she was, the clever, striking, independent woman she wanted to be, was stripped away from her. Night City and its cruel reality took everything from her. And while Judy does discover how deep into trouble Evelyn was when she goes through her memories, and while Judy does get angry at her, Judy is not angry at being used by Evelyn. Judy is angry that Evelyn would think she had no other option but this, even if that may have been the reality for Evelyn. Evelyn was always between a rock and a hard place, and she took her chance to try and escape. Judy cares for Evelyn until Evelyn takes her own life. All of Evelyn's life, her body was a commodity. Her personality was a facade, meant to shift and suit the people who used her. Evelyn, even if she herself had begun to take on the habit of using others to her own ends, Evelyn was not a cruel person. I don't think Evelyn ultimately had the stomach to make this heist work. At the risk of sounding cliche, I think Evelyn was too good a person to play the Night City game the way she tried to. In running away from Lizzie's and from Judy, Evelyn meant to protect Judy one last time. Evelyn ended her own life only after experiencing horrors, and as far as I'm concerned, each scav in Cyberpunk gets exactly what they deserve from V. Judy even finds, in the few clear memories that she can dig up from Evelyn, that Ev was thinking of her last parting words with Judy before returning to Clouds that final time. Evelyn, in all the suffering she was enduring, still regretted the pain that she had caused Judy. Evelyn, with her last act, still protects Judy, even if she did not intend it. Even if her loss breaks her, and Judy does get to live the dream of leaving Night City, in most of her endings anyway. But she will always remember Evelyn, the girl, like so many, who had a dream of something better. In the sleepy little town of Laguna Bend, on the outskirts of Night City, there was a little girl named Judy. Judy was bright, spunky, and above all, led by a good heart. But even after the town of Laguna Bend was submerged, locked away from the light of day, this little girl never left it. Judy was alone in the dark hallways of its memories, the sole light left to glow in the shadows. Here Judy held her vigil until it nearly destroys her. Judy grew up in Laguna Bend, a small town that used to be on the outskirts of Night City. While she still played with the other kids, Judy was still the bottom of the pecking order. The other kids never failed to remind her of her poverty and the fact that she had no parents to speak of. But Judy was unafraid of being herself. Her grandfather inspired her love of technology, which led to her becoming the genius braindance editor that we know her as. Based on entries you can read on her personal terminal, Judy is an expert techie, but she would much rather pursue her talents in an artistic, independent field, rather than sell out to a corporation. Judy has her principles in a place that tends to snuff them out. Judy's distaste for injustice stems from the fact that Laguna Bend, despite the fact that it was still a bustling town with plenty of people living in it, was flooded by corporate interests. Quite literally. Despite protests and people still wanting to live in their homes, the corporation that wanted to build a reservoir that would swallow Laguna Bend began the process of doing so. Things got bad enough that the company was conducting a smear campaign against the residents of Laguna Bend, calling them political dissidents, even though they were just trying to defend their homes. One of the worst incidents during the protests was when a Laguna Bend resident climbed on top of one of the cranes. The crane operator was ordered to continue construction, and in their attempts at trying to remove the protester by force, they lost control of the crane's payload. It crushed one of the homes below with a family still inside. Even with the good intentions of that person who climbed that crane, filled with passion, grief, and a sense of justice, this was not enough to actually change anything. All it did was lead to the events that killed even more innocents. One less family to protest the corporate interests that were inevitably going to win here. What are good intentions in a city that doesn't even register good versus bad? In Night City, might equals right, and that is what happened with Judy's childhood home. Judy took from this instance the truth of injustice in Night City, and from here on out, resolves to live her life in defiance of the uncaring values that were rampant around her. In Judy's mind, if she can do good, she should. The only problem for her was figuring out the right way to do that good. And this is also where Judy begins to sink deeper and deeper into a reality far too cold for her fiery heart. Judy started her tech work at Clouds, editing brain dances. It was here that she first met Evelyn, Tom, Roxy, and Maiko. Judy's tenure here did not last long, due to the horrible treatment of the dolls that worked there. The Tiger Claws that owned Clouds were only concerned with the money that came in at their establishment. So long as any potential abuse and violence against the dolls that were under their employment generated enough money, the Claws would look the other way. I also can't help but wonder just how many horrible things Judy would have seen in editing brain dances at Clouds. I'm assuming she would have unfortunately had to witness some of the worst clients through the doll's memories. Judy was just a techie, and although she knew the doll chips very well, she still wouldn't have been able to enact any real change at Clouds. This helplessness would have been heartbreaking for her, knowing what was going on behind the scenes here. That is, until she fell for Maiko. Maiko was just a doll when her and Judy started dating, but it wasn't long before Judy, who was a hopeless romantic to a fault, tweaked Maiko's doll chip to help her rise in the ranks. The idea was that if Maiko got promoted, Maiko could start to make some of these changes that Judy really wanted to see at Clouds. Changes that could make life better for the dolls that worked there. Or at the very least, that is how Maiko appealed to Judy. Part of me feels like because Judy wears her heart on her sleeve, she can be a beacon for people who want comfort, but also kind of attracting certain people who might view her as easy to manipulate, especially with her very valuable skills as a techie. Sometimes people with a goal to get something from someone else can come off as confident and in control to someone who feels hopeless and floating with no real sense of direction. I believe that Judy was so eager to help Maiko shoot right up the ranks because Maiko presented her promotion in a way that gave Judy a sense of just direction. As much as Judy wants to make genuine change in Clouds, she is not the best with people, or at deciding what direction is best. I think the hard nature of the place she lives is very overwhelming for her. Any love and affection that Maiko could show Judy was likely a huge relief to her after a long day of dealing with the gross environment she worked in. But of course, the irony of this love and affection is that Maiko, even if she may have felt genuinely for Judy, was still using it to manipulate her, sort of perverting that one precious thing that Judy thought she had in Night City. Maiko appealed to Judy in the sense that she was giving Judy the illusion of making the change she so craved, and doing it with someone that she cared about and thought shared her values to an extent. As time went on, even after Maiko was promoted, her promised changes were few and far between. For a while, Maiko could blame the higher-ups at Clouds, she could blame the Tiger Claw bosses, and say that she was getting to it. Meanwhile, Judy decided to leave Clouds to join the Mox, a gang run by Joy Toys for Joy Toys. While Judy still kept things on with Maiko, she would rather use her talents to help people, where all the money from these brain dances that she was tuning would at least go back to the performers, and to the members of the gang that worked the streets. But Judy soon began to realize Maiko's true intentions. As someone who only sought power for herself, Maiko did not share Judy's immense sense of right and wrong. And from all the dolls Judy still kept in touch with, she realized that nothing at Clouds was changing and nothing was going to change. The only real change was Maiko, who was getting far more money and luxury from the work that the other dolls were now doing. This realization shattered Judy, but the pain of realizing Maiko's manipulation of her and the loss of their breakup was a lot for Judy. Adding on to this is when some friction developed between Judy and Susie Q, the Mox leader. On one hand, Judy wanted the Mox to help every Joy Toy that needed it. She would invite countless unaffiliated to seek protection and assistance from the gang. Despite the passion of the Mox's members, the Mox really don't have much to throw around in the way of resources, and Susie Q knows this. Susie and Judy began to butt heads over their goals. To Judy, Susie's reluctance to help every Joy Toy that needed it was unfair and unjust. But for Susie, the cold reality is that the Mox do not have the resources to realistically do this. The Mox are just managing to support themselves. This was yet another moment of Judy's own black and white view on the world being shaken. Judy had been manipulated. She'd been used and let down by her own ideas of promise and change. For Judy, what good was any of the things that she had done for other people? Any flicker of hope was always extinguished for her in her quest to create change. So, when Evelyn Parker came back into the picture, begging for help, Judy couldn't resist. Evelyn had ghosted Judy for at least a time. I think this is because of Evelyn's involvement with Yorinobu Arasaka, living a much more comfortable existence for as long as she was his companion. Whether that's true or not, Evelyn was certainly out of the loop when it came to Judy. Evelyn asked Judy to help her with the brain dance that she was going to take of Konpeki Plaza, making Judy absolutely essential for the heist that Evelyn was planning. Evelyn didn't let Judy in on all the details right away, and despite Judy's own suspicions, Judy was more than willing to help her friend, even without these details. Some could even deduce that perhaps Judy held more than friendly feelings for Evelyn. It's hard to say. The developers have said in the past that they intended to leave Judy and Evelyn's relationship ambiguous. Personally, I do think that Judy grew to love her over the course of their reconnecting. Perhaps it was a way for Judy to try to fill that void that was left after her breakup with Maiko. But I also think that Evelyn, not unlike Maiko, was willing to use this to her advantage in getting Judy to help out another doll with another grand plan. But by time V comes into the picture of the heist, Judy is already at the end of her rope. Judy warns V and Evelyn about the danger that they're both in. Judy didn't even know that this heist was even related to Konpeki Plaza until she was looking at the brain dance through V's eyes, which is kind of crazy that Evelyn didn't really tell her that. As much of an idealist as Judy is, she is not crazy enough to think that she can pull the wool over Arasaka's eyes and not expect any consequences. Evelyn had promised Judy that this heist could give her a life of peace, where she could pursue a life of art, a passion of Judy's, to her heart's content. During the Laguna Bend flashbacks that we see in the quest Pyramid Song, Judy says that she used to think that people who played with dolls were losers. In a way, as an adult, this has kind of come full circle. Playing with dolls had led Judy to heartbreak, and now it would absolutely lead her to heartbreaking loss. After the heist ended in catastrophe, Judy and Evelyn had a falling out. Yet despite this, after not hearing from her after Ev left for Clouds, Judy becomes incredibly worried about her. Once V discovers the truth of what happened to Evelyn, V and Judy go on a wild goose chase through Night City trying to find Evelyn, and they are eventually successful. However, they are too late to save Evelyn from the horrors that she has endured. Judy was incredibly brave and devoted to finding Evelyn during this mission. I think it's safe to say that Judy is not the most combat experienced person in Night City, so the fact that she was willing to dive into the scav hideout to find her with no hesitation says a lot about her character. And Judy is, despite the circumstances of their parting, devoted to caring for Evelyn after all is said and done. Judy even scrolls Evelyn's memories to try and piece together the whole story. Judy also sees that Evelyn was still thinking of her and the words that they shared when they last parted. Despite everything, Evelyn was still thinking of Judy and how much she regretted their last words. Judy cares for Evelyn right up until she takes her own life, and Judy is devastated by it. Regardless of the potential nature of her feelings, in Evelyn's death, Judy saw yet another innocent brutally tortured by Night City. The child still stuck in Laguna Bend sees yet another ruin sunk to the bottom of this lake. With V's help, Judy organizes her own grand plan, fueled by anger and grief. Judy tries to paint this plan as a good thing, as a plan that can make some real change in Night City, the change that she wished the Mox could bring. But in reality, what Judy wants is revenge disguised as justice. Judy wants to overthrow the Tiger Claws that are in charge of Clouds and turn it into a doll-run establishment. So Judy goes to Maiko, proposing her plan to her ex. In Judy's mind, together they can finally make those changes that Maiko had once promised her she would make. Maiko is cold enough to know that this plan is doomed. It will not turn out the way Judy wants it to, no matter what. Even if a softness for Judy still exists in Maiko, and if you look at her terminal actually, you can see that it does, as she still has a picture of Judy and has been struggling to move on from her. It's not enough to blind Maiko to the fact that the dolls could never hold Clouds. I also kind of think that Judy does go back to Maiko in a way kind of seeking comfort, whether she realizes it or not. I think a part of her would love it if Maiko had just magically started seeing the world through Judy's bright eyes, but that's not how it goes, and the two part on angry terms once again. Judy still dealing with the pain and suffering of her grief. But Maiko does appear to change her mind. And not long after, Judy gets Tom and Roxy in on her idea of a hostile takeover. As Judy tries to present this plan, even Johnny is annoyed by it. Even he can see just how this will all end. With V's help, Judy and the dolls manage to grip Clouds in a chokehold. They brutally take out Woodman, the Clouds manager who had assaulted Evelyn while she was comatose. Even after this, Judy is shaken. Not out of regret for getting rid of Woodman, not at all, but because Judy is just beginning to realize the fact that no amount of revenge will fill the void that all of this tragedy has punched inside of her. Everything else goes according to plan after this, at least until Maiko shows her hand. Maiko basically uses this as an opportunity to coerce the other Tiger Claw bosses to let her run Clouds for them. There's only really two endings to this plan of Judy's. One being that if V does kill the Tiger Claw bosses, they will inevitably come back in full force and wipe out a lot of the dolls at Clouds and take it back. The other ending is that Maiko does continue to run it, now officially, and absolutely nothing changes. Following Judy's specific plan is arguably the worst ending. Letting Maiko take over for the Claws is the most sobering end of this quest for Judy, and the one that avoids the most bloodshed. Not only was her plan for revenge used and manipulated by someone she had once loved, again, Judy fell for the great deception of Night City that Evelyn had fallen for.
That he can gain and retain control of anything.
In a heartless city where there are no rules, no standards or rights or wrongs, Judy's own idea that good will triumph over evil is false. Judy's own rage and grief was not sated either. If you take Maiko's bribe to walk away quietly, Judy leaves you for good and never speaks to you again. She still has her principles despite everything, but Judy is left angry and confused and alone. But should you remain true to Judy, rejecting the blood money that Maiko offers to V. Judy simply says that she needs time to herself and walks away. All her life, Judy has lived in a world of black and white. She has refused to see it any other way. But as she leaves V behind, the neon Night City looks a bit grayer than usual. The quest, Pyramid Song, is a headstone for the Judy that we used to know. While Judy poses this as a fun brain dance experiment, a prototype even for a really cool product that she's been working on for a while. I think this is Judy's way of reconciling with her past and the beliefs that have led her to so much pain. Here we revisit her memories of a simpler time. Just like anything else in this place, people forget about the horrors that happen just to keep existing and sort of remaining sane. Ignoring the injustices around them is how anybody manages to stay standing in a place like Night City. But Judy refuses to forget. And after she and V make their dive, I think Judy makes her choice to hold the memories of those that she cared about even closer to her heart. Memories of her childhood, of Laguna Bend, and even Evelyn. But she also knows she has to let them go to truly be free. Judy can't stay submerged in their pain for the rest of her life. Pyramid Song is actually a song by Radiohead, and it was written by Tom York after he went to an exhibition at a museum that involved tomb art and death ritual artifacts, that kind of stuff. One of the lyrics speaks of black-eyed angels swimming with the person the song's perspective is from, implied to be beings that ended their own life. I think that this whole quest is Judy revisiting all of those ghosts that she has been swimming with after all these years. Evelyn, potentially Maiko, all the way back to that family that was crushed in their house in the days Laguna Bend could still see the sun. Ghosts who, in life, were snuffed out and simply forgotten. As harsh as it is, there is nobody left who cares about what happened in Laguna Bend. Nobody cares what happens to some Joy Toy past her expiry date, and nobody cares if your intentions are good. Judy's attempts to force change in this world fail because her focus on what should be clouds her vision over what actually is. Night City is a cruel, unfeeling place, run by cruel and unfeeling values. Kill or be killed, better them than you, and so on. Just as that person who climbed that crane realized only too late that their well-intended actions were ultimately fruitless against the overwhelming powers that be, so did Judy in that failure at Clouds. Failure to save Evelyn. Failure to make Maiko see the light. And until this mission, a failure to let go. So many failures that Judy blames herself for in a world that is unfair and impossible to fight in the first place. For all of these people, Judy has been carrying the pain of their loss and the nature of their loss. And I think she comes back here to finally emerge from these dark waters as someone who is willing to move on and to continue living, to keep hope, but to not sacrifice herself to do so. Judy knows that she can't really leave Night City until she lets go of the mad cycle it was washing her through. And finally, at long last, with V by her side, Judy finally does this. She finally lets go. I also don't think it's a coincidence that this funeral-esque quest takes place in part in a church, where Judy can say that proper final goodbye to those ghosts that she knows all too well. And to top it all off, I think it's really sweet that they decided to allow Judy to be able to save somebody she cares about at long last, by saving V when the relic malfunctions, and otherwise V would have drowned. So it's nice to see that this rebirth of Judy actually manages to accomplish what she had tried and failed so many times to do for the people she cared most about. Only in letting go for her own sake is Judy able to finally pull somebody else up from the abyss. I want to end this with my own thoughts on Judy's romance, and why I think that while it is absolutely the best romance in the game, and I almost feel like it's the canon romance in the game, I think it's still the worst option for Judy. I think that Judy should absolutely leave Night City. For her to leave, and while it could be viewed as a bleak symbol, like her finally emerging from Laguna Bend once and for all, I think it is also one of hope, of rebirth. And even if Judy has a very fiery personality, there is water symbolism packed into every part of her character and her questline. It is in her tattoos, it is in her backstory, it's her fish tank in her apartment, it is the general theme of her art, her quest called Pisces. Somebody even said, if you know things about horoscopes, she is a stereotypical Pisces, which I thought was very funny. And I think attaching the meanings of rebirth and carving a new path and renewal and that kind of thing is a really nice sort of tie-in to what I personally think is the fate that Judy deserves, being able to move on like a river. Very nice, right? Not river, not that river. Water is a classic symbol of new beginnings, and I think that for her to finally leave Night City shows that while your past will always be a part of you and it will always shape you, that doesn't mean that you can't detach yourself from a horrible situation. You don't have to sacrifice your opportunities of living a better life. There is always hope to do good for the world while also taking care of you. I like the fact that Judy leaves Night City still a moral person, and a free one at that. She understands now that she cannot change everything wrong with this world, but she can make a difference in the lives of those she cares about. She can build a life for herself and pursue what she loves, and still make a positive effect on the world. Bearing the weight of other people's happiness is just not gonna work. At the end of the day, you gotta put your own oxygen mask on to help other people put their oxygen masks on. You know, the old airplane statement. And I think that's what Judy learned. And I also want to say that I still don't feel that even when you leave Night City with the Aldecaldos and you get Judy to come with you, that still doesn't feel like a very fulfilling ending, at least in my opinion. Like, if you're talking best ending for V, I think that is absolutely the best ending for V. But I feel like that is almost like Judy letting V kind of choose the direction her life should take. Whereas I think for Judy, what she needs to do is to finally just choose a direction for herself, and if that is to leave Night City and go exploring and eventually settle down with Bianca, that's great. I think that is the ending that she needs, even if it's not the best for V. And I think V is far too chaotic and deep into the Night City life to offer her what she deserves. I think that the Phantom Liberty ending is the best possible ending for Judy. In this ending, she leaves Night City for good, and she is happy. She lives in peace with a woman who loves her wholly. And as much as Judy may have wanted all those things that she cared about to matter to the rest of the world, things are not always so black and white. And that she is not the one who has to bear the weight of the world on her shoulders. Of all the things to call Maiko Maeda, victim is not the first word that comes to mind. She's been known and shown to put ambition above loyalty and love, often burning the people who cared about her in the process. And she is not at all above lies and manipulation in the process of getting to where she wants to be. But Maiko has a hidden tenderness, still tending the wounds she sustained in her days as a doll. After a life of subservience, Maiko was ready to shoot for the stars, even if that meant that she scorched the world, that she would someday come crashing back down too. Maiko's past is a blank slate, and the only thing we really know about her is that she used to be a doll at Clouds. Before her rise to unofficial managership of the establishment, she was in the trenches with Evelyn, Tom, and Roxy, doing whatever clients wanted and making money for the claws. I'm sure like most dolls, Maiko once had other ideas for herself. Maybe they weren't as grand as Evelyn Parker's, but like so many other people in Night City, these dreams get stomped out by the overwhelming weight of its power structure. As a doll, Maiko would have seen and experienced her fair share of unfavorable clients, whether she remembered it or not. But perhaps she wasn't progressing quite as fast and as far as she hoped she would have been. Maybe Maiko was worried that because she wasn't as popular as Evelyn and she didn't have as much veteran potential as Roxy, that she would be left out in the gutter like so much scrap. So when she realized just what she could accomplish by getting a certain love-struck techie on her side, Maiko leapt for the opportunity. Judy admits that when she fell for Maiko, she fell hard. She says that she had a huge crush on her, and I think it is safe to say that Maiko was probably aware of it before getting with her. Her character is, at least every time we see her, always one step ahead of Judy anyway. Judy is a compassionate and caring person who despised the treatment of the dolls at Clouds. To her, the Tiger Claws were just users and abusers. Still, Judy knew that there wasn't much she could do on her own. She was just a braindance editor. But in her time at Clouds, Judy made friends with a lot of the dolls there, Maiko included. From there, a relationship sprouted, and Judy was very happy. And while we don't really know if the relationship started on Maiko's end from genuine feelings, or if it was Maiko's desire to utilize Judy's talents to her own ends, we do know that Maiko did grow to care about Judy. Maiko knew Judy's dreams and hopes. Judy did want to make a genuine change in the lives of any Joy Toys who chose to follow the same path as the rest of the dolls. By this point, it's probable that the ambitious Maiko was done waiting to be recognized. Trying to catch the attention of the higher-ups in the usual way was not working out the way she wanted. And so, Maiko turned to Judy, asking her to tweak her doll chip to boost her stats. Maiko's hope was that the Claws would take notice of her, and they did. While Maiko wasn't the official manager of Clouds, she was given the unofficial position of running the establishment. She was promoted enough that she no longer had to work as a doll. Maiko even outranked Woodman at this point, which would have been a point of satisfaction for her, I'm sure. But Judy didn't help get Maiko power for its own sake. Judy was hoping that Maiko would use her newfound position to make the changes that Clouds so needed, but I think it's likely that she knew just what to say to convince Judy that she wanted the same things as her. Maiko went from being nothing but a Joy Toy to running one of the most famous brothels in Night City. She went from being harassed by Woodman to being able to lord over him. But I think Maiko did enjoy her seniority over the other dolls. Maiko made no real attempts to make things better for them. In Judy's words, she still treats these people, some of them people that she used to work alongside, like meat. The way Maiko even speaks of Evelyn's death and assault is near dismissive. She patronizes Judy for her grief, while Maiko herself at most seems mildly inconvenienced by the death of one of their top earners. I think this is a hint that Maiko likes to forget where she came from. She exercises this by looking down on those still fighting just to pay the bills on the ground floor. I think it's easier to forget the things she would have seen and endured for who knows how long, than to acknowledge them and try to make things better for the next generation, so to speak. because in doing so, that would threaten the seat of power that she now holds. When no changes at Clouds are made, Judy does leave. But not long after joining the Mox, Judy realizes that Maiko has been choosing her power over maintaining their relationship. Judy and Maiko had a nasty breakup. It's a small detail, but in one of the emails between Judy and Maiko post-breakup, you can see Judy telling Maiko to come and get her clothes. Maiko tells her to just throw them in the street. Judy simply responds that it is a luxury that Maiko can afford to buy such expensive clothes and then ditch them in the trash. This is just another little hint that Maiko is reveling in her power and her newfound wealth, enjoying the more material sides of her new position. But the ultimate irony of Maiko in this situation is the fact that as much as she loves to tote her own success as her own, she would never have gotten to where she is without the help of Judy. After Evelyn's death and Judy gets her idea to take Clouds from the Tiger Claws, the first person that Judy goes to is Maiko. One could say that this is because Maiko is the manager. She is definitely the person you would want on your side if you're planning to take over her establishment. But I also think that it's because a part of Judy still hopes that she can turn Maiko around. And as we can see on Maiko's personal terminal, she does still care for Judy. She has a picture of her marked "Do Not Delete." She has tried and failed to move on from her. Maiko is seemingly lonely without this genuine companionship, without the care and the comfort that Judy would offer her, and so she still clings to Judy's memory. When Maiko offers Judy her job back, this may very well be a partial joke, but I do think that Maiko would have been thrilled if Judy had come back. This is further proof of her loneliness in this position of power that she had clawed her way to the top 4. But Maiko would still stubbornly hold on to her fancy office and expensive clothes, rather than throw it all away for a better life with Judy, even with the current emptiness that now festers within her. But when Judy comes into her office and more or less rejects everything that Maiko's life has become, this seals the deal for both of them. Neither accept the livelihoods and values and facts of life of the other, and neither are willing to give or take in ways that could bring them to a potential compromise. And perhaps nothing would have changed even if they had approached things in a more diplomatic way. But I think the face-off here, especially given that neither of them give any ground whatsoever, is what leads Maiko to bitterly decide to use Judy one last time. But there is one thing here that Maiko does do if you didn't kill Woodman in the first place. Maiko ties a neat little bow on this tense meeting with Judy by giving V and Judy access to Woodman, so they can enact their own revenge for Evelyn. And while I'm sure that Maiko didn't like to hear what Woodman did to Ev, and also didn't like him anyway, this wasn't as much of a show of good faith as it may seem. On a data shard in Maiko's office, she wrote to the Claws to tell them to fire Woodman, and that she would take over his duties. Maybe Maiko saw this as an opportunity to take out the trash and keep her hands clean, as much as she wanted to get another grip on the reins of Clouds. Who really knows? When Maiko appeared to have a change of heart about Judy's plan for Clouds, she was, once again, 2 steps ahead of her. Judy didn't see Maiko's incoming treachery, even if she was already suspicious of her. Even if Maiko's disrespect for her, after their last talk, was becoming more and more evident. Maiko ambles around Judy's apartment like she owns the place. She almost struts around, looking down on Judy's more humble surroundings. She even smokes inside, being difficult when Judy, someone who has been trying to quit smoking, at least until Evelyn's death, tells her to go outside. Maiko taunts Judy, but she still makes it seem like she will go along with this plan. But Maiko had been planning to use the opportunity to show her own cleverness to her bosses. Only through deceiving the Tiger Claw bosses, and V and Judy on top of that, does Maiko make her point that she should be running Clouds. After all, Hiromi is clearly not capable of running a tight ship if a coup can be staged in its premises. If V decides to go against her here, the bosses call her weak, and you are forced to put them down. Maiko will also attack V, enraged that she will never be able to grasp what she had spent so many years reaching for. In a way, I can understand Maiko's anger here. She spent years as a doll, under Woodman. And to top it all off, she gave up Judy in her pursuit of more. We can only imagine what other thumbs that she's been under throughout her life. For this chance to be snatched away from her after so long and so much would be very painful. Even if she is left alive after attacking V, there is no way she could continue at Clouds. She would be back out on the streets. But if you do go along with Maiko's plan and help install her as the official head of Clouds, Judy is mad, but Clouds doesn't get raided by vengeful claws later. Maiko does offer V money here, which V can take or deny. But now she's got the big Tiger Claw money, and she's already tossing it around. The apartment we see around her is probably hers too. Maiko used Judy here one last time, I think in part to spite her, but it does feel like cutting off your nose to spite your face sort of deal. In doing this, there is absolutely no chance that Judy will ever come back to her life, as much as Maiko may have wanted that, and I believe that she did. I think it's unlikely that Judy would have anyway, but still, there's no forgiveness here to be had. I think that Judy's judgment of her when Judy went into her office with V was too much for Maiko to handle. It made her lash out in a way that shattered Judy's heart all over again. And later on, we find out from Judy that nothing has changed at Clouds. Roxy sends a message saying just as much. Maiko is still doing everything as it was before, with a focus on profits and staying in the good graces of the Claws. Maiko lives a life that ensures comfort and stability for her, not for the people working under her. Despite everything Maiko did, and despite how nasty she is a lot like Evelyn. Both Maiko and Evelyn wanted more out of their lives. They wanted to be more than just dolls. They both bore the brunt of human disregard and insensitivity, and that is putting it lightly. Both conjured up their own plans to get where they wanted to be, and both were willing to use other people to get to those places. But the greatest difference between them was the fact that Evelyn saw and accepted where she had gone wrong. Evelyn realized, albeit a little too late, what she would miss in life, and sought to protect it. She sought to protect Judy, where Maiko was embittered towards Judy, towards her own past as a joy toy. Evelyn realized she'd hurt the one person she cared about in Night City. Evelyn runs away from Judy to protect her from any danger by association with her after the heist goes badly. I can understand how Maiko felt a bit judged by Judy. Ha 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 ha. Especially considering that Maiko was the doll in this situation, not her. I'm sure her first-hand experiences, if she remembers them or is aware of them, were not great. But Maiko still chose to continue the cycle of abuse that she herself had been through. Anybody who wanted to get anywhere would have to go through what she went through to get there. She was not about to be extending a helping hand. If there's one thing that we have learned about Night City, it is that people like Maiko tend to win more than people like Judy. Our final sight of Maiko is at Kurt Hansen's party in the Phantom Liberty expansion. She is here along with the other Tiger Claw higher-ups, but she's not really with them. She's the lowest on the ladder. Maiko fought so hard to be highest in the Clouds, only to find that she is still nothing in this city. The Tiger Claws will never see her as anything more than a doll reaching far above her position. And Maiko is no friend to the people on the other end of the stick either. The dolls will never view Maiko as one of them. In Maiko's quest to flee from her past and implant herself among those she deemed more successful, all she did was alienate herself. In the end, you can't help but wonder if Maiko looks at it all, and wonders just what she's done. Maiko was ultimately a victim of her own version of success. Throughout Cyberpunk 2077, we come face to face with some of its rare living legends. Rogue Amendiarez, Adam Smasher, and even Johnny Silverhand, kinda sorta, if you count him in this situation. But there is one that is really easy to overlook. Someone more organic than Borg, and someone who's definitely got a lot of stories to tell. Rather than live a potentially short life of fame and fortune with a notorious legacy of posthumous myths, Victor Vector chose the quiet life. It's why he is still alive and kicking by 2077, but make no mistake, Vic is certainly not weak, even if he never charges into battle at our side or against us. If anything, I think that Vic is one of the strongest characters we meet in Cyberpunk 2077. But Vic's story goes to show that even as a moral person, even as someone who may intend to do more good than bad, and even as someone who lives that quiet life, the entropy of Night City will always win. Before his career as a successful Ripperdoc, Vic was a well-known heavyweight boxer, enough of one that people still remember the achievements of Victor Vector in the ring. In 2077, most of those who are worth their salt are chipped to the nines, but Vic comes from the days where cyberware was half as prominent. Keep this in mind whenever you talk to Vic, or read those threats that he makes to the scavs in those emails. Vic does not make empty threats. Vic fought his way to the Watson Grand Prix and came in second, but ultimately decided that a life of fame and fortune and potential disaster, as things tend to go in Night City, was not for him. The risk was not worth the reward. Vic chose what he called the quiet life, working as a Ripperdoc in his own quiet clinic. Over the years, he did build up a really good rep and a good string of clients through fixers and mercenaries. By the time V and Jackie are on the scene, Vic is considered one of the best Ripperdocs, not only for his skill, but also for his care of his clients. For that reason alone, he is a standout in his profession, who doesn't even try to cash in on his glory days. According to his codex, Vic would prefer it if nobody mentioned it at all. In his earlier days as a competitive boxer in a place like Night City, he has almost certainly seen murder, brutality, and manipulation in every way. If Vic wanted to be nasty, he could be nasty. To expand on the subject of the scav emails that you can find in the intro mission, where you rescue Sandra Dorset, you can see the scavs making threats to Vic. Vic hits back, warning that any scavs who try to come to his clinic will get more than a split jaw. Vic tells them too, and I quote, "Try me, motherfuckers." The scavs never reply, and this could be because we take them out. But somehow I think that they were going to leave Vic alone at this point. Keep in mind Vic's skill level and his strength despite his lack of implants, and also his age, and he is still able to be intimidating. Knowing that Vic knows how to be mean hints at some stuff he may have experienced and or done in his past, which is one reason why it is so precious that we get to see the good side of Victor Vector. And nowhere else do we see this as well as we do through the eyes of Jackie, V, and Misty. Perhaps Jackie met Vic through Vic's work as a Ripperdoc, but what truly cemented the bond between these two is boxing. After Vic stepped out of the ring himself, he still wanted to stay in the sport, and so he became a trainer and a coach. He still loved his old game, and you can tell by all the trophies and memorabilia he still keeps in his shop. And in his own words, Jackie Wells is one of the best fighters he has ever trained. Jackie's father used to beat him and his mother in Jackie's childhood, until one day, Jackie fought back hard enough that he put his father in the hospital. There's a part of me that has this notion that Jackie went to Vic and learned how to fight, which is what led to Jackie being able to defend himself and his mom. Maybe Jackie started training after his dad left, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but it is absolutely something that I think Vic would very much so want to help Jackie with, short of going and dealing with it himself. I like to think it's the first one. It would certainly explain why Jackie and Vic are so close. Vic later brings a pair of boxing gloves to Jackie's ofrenda, talking about how Jackie was the first person he ever trained to knock him out with one punch. Vic sits at the bar, drinking with Pepe and mourning the loss of this good person. I'm sure a part of Vic blames himself. Maybe for not warning Jackie more about Dex, or for being the Ripper who helped build Jackie to the point that he felt confident enough to get swallowed up by the promise of this job. Vic also rents out his shop space from Misty, and they have a very sweet bond. You can see it in their emails to each other, where Misty apologizes for being late and she sends hugs. And when Vic is operating on V, he calls for her. Misty stands in as almost a spiritual kind of rock, or an emotional rock to other characters in Night City, and I think she is that for Victor. He relies on her in that way. She's not just a landlord to him. It's just extremely sweet to see the bond these two have, because you don't really see wholesome relationships on display throughout Night City. It's understandable, of course, given the nature of this place. So it's very precious when you get to see it. But because of Vic's genuine care and emotion, we can also see the sad irony of Victor's internal struggle with who he is as a person versus the profession that he does in order to survive. Like Doc is for David in Edge Runners, Victor is our main character's main Ripper. Even if you visit other Ripper docs in 2077, Vic is the one that V is closest to. And, also like Doc, Vic displays that internal conflict of his own morals versus what he does for a living. It's just displayed in opposite ways. For Doc, he does his best to separate emotion from patient. He gets his money and he provides the service. It is a transaction. Sometimes Doc might even marvel at the strength and tolerance of a certain patient, like David, in a way almost dehumanizing them to an experiment or subject. But from what we see of Doc's final scene, there is a degree of hopelessness that he feels with having built David to death, more or less. And yes, Doc warned David and David still pushed for it, but Doc also never said no. He just kept going too. When it comes to Vic, Vic compensates for what I think is his guilt, his struggle with accepting the enabling nature of his profession by caring for his patients the way that he does. Vic goes above and beyond in ways that we don't see other Rippers doing. And yes, that includes using anesthetic. From the beginning of V's story, Vic warns V about Dex. Vic is one of the first characters that you meet in this game, and here he is already warning you. Vic might be retired from his rougher days, but he still has an ear to the ground in the world of mercenaries. He knows that Dex is bad news. But still, Vic chips V with some new fancy implants, and even waives the payment for a later date, because he would rather have a late payment than have V die on this job. Despite his own doubts, he still wishes you luck and playfully says that he hopes you remember him when you hit the big leagues. This reveals a complexity to Victor, kind of the chicken or the egg situation. Does the promise of success make you go for the implants, or do the implants make you go for the success? I think it's honestly just both of these ideas circling each other endlessly. But no matter what, there's no denying the confidence that a fresh top-of-the-line implant can give a merc. Just look at V after testing the Kiroshi optics and whatnot. Yes, you could argue that this is a gameplay mechanic meant to kind of immerse you into the wonders of cyberware. It's supposed to be cool, but still, it's a big deal for a young merc like V to have these top-of-the-line implants for their next big gig, and to have their Ripper docs support. Objects cannot replace raw skill, but it can sure feel like it for a while. And Vic would have to be aware of this, especially as a Ripper who has no doubt seen countless solos run to their deaths after getting a fresh implant, one that they thought would make their careers. I think it's also interesting that Vic himself is not heavily chipped. It calls to mind the saying of not sampling your own supply. And who would know better the dangers of cyberware than the one who installs it? Of course, this could just be his personal preference. Maybe his body can't handle it. It's an interesting idea, but I got no proof. The other huge thing that separates Vic from others and displays his internal struggle is how he fights to save V's life. In what flashes we see of these hectic hours in Vic's clinic, he's working desperately to ensure that we survive, when most Rippers would have ditched V and dubbed them a lost cause. You can imagine how long this surgery took, and how many people and profits Vic may have had to turn away in the time it took to save V. But because Vic genuinely cares, combined with the guilt of losing so many other solos that he was probably friendly with, especially Jackie. And I think this is compounded by Misty's presence with him at this time. Misty, who has just lost her boyfriend and is mourning his death. The last thing that she needs is one more death of a friend to make this situation even more horrible. And while yes, V's surgery is a success, you can see how devastated Victor is when he has to tell V that there's nothing he can do to stop Johnny's rewriting of V's brain. It's like Vic feels responsible for his own lack of experience and his own lack of skill in this regard, which is so sad because Vic did more than 99% of other people in Night City ever would have. I believe that Vic is aware of his role in this violent cycle of Night City, but he still refuses to surrender who he is as a person and the morals that he holds to the sheer reality of it. And this is a good and bad thing. As yes, he is still a key enabler in this destructive system. And I think it's a struggle for him to admit that because of the values that he holds. So he hides that truth behind the idea that he can still do good in an otherwise grisly profession. The good that he can do can outweigh the bad. But Vic does genuinely want to save lives, and he wants to do good, and he does it where he can. He pays his respects to and acknowledges good people. There's a sort of pain in observing Vic's good heart, and the root of it comes from knowing the brutal ecosystem of the environment he survives in. It's acknowledging how busted and incongruous this system is in this city, with the kinder human virtues and values we are taught to strive for each day, but we also do not see reflected in our own system, even in the real world. And I think for me, that's one reason why Victor Vector is such a character I can sympathize with. After V's surgery and period of rest, Vic is still there to offer his services to us. When you pay off Vic's debt, he tries to say no and tries to insist that you keep the money. But V insists that no, Vic, you get your money, and he does accept it. As he should. There is no other character that I can think of in Night City that I have met that is like that. And there's also the quest, Beat on the Brat, where V participates in their own street fighting tournaments, leading all the way to the final fight at the Grand Imperial Mall. Victor is here to support V and to be their coach. He helps us win the fight by telling us some of Razor Hugh's weaknesses, and when we win, Vic is very proud. But he also knows if we throw that fight, and he calls V out on it. Vic calls things like he sees them when it comes to boxing, even if that's something that he struggles with in his Ripper Doc profession. Again, that Night City pattern of willful blindness in order to survive. As a total other note, part of me can't help but wonder Vic's annoyance at V throwing this fight connects to his own second place win in the Watson Grand Prix. Maybe Vic threw the fight there and that's why he didn't win. Maybe he looks back on that and regrets it. Maybe that's one reason why he left the sport like he did, because of the corruption. Maybe that's why he's like, God damn it, V, why? After Jackie's death and all of the regrets Vic likely has about not being able to save him and not being able to save V from the relic, Vic resolves to be there. But the fact that Vic's friendship and dedication to V is also based on the immense guilt he feels for his role as a Ripperdoc in the system that consumed them definitely permeates this bond. It's just another sad thing about Vic, or at least that's how I view it. And this all hits home with the cruel realities presented in the Phantom Liberty ending. The Phantom Liberty ending is a polarizing one, and it is bittersweet. And that is also why it is my favorite ending of the game. I deeply appreciate it for the cruel reality that it displays. It sheds a new light on Night City, as well as the sadness of the quiet life in Night City. Early on, Dexter Deshawn goes from knocking the quiet life to cozying right up to it, because he just wants to survive. But Dex's viewing of it as just a place to scurry to when things get tough shows his complete misunderstanding of it. I find Vic to be a very good character to contrast with Dex in this regard. Vic chose long ago to accept the quiet life. And one thing you need to recognize is the strength that it takes to choose that life, especially after climbing the ladder of fame and fortune like Vic did. Vic could have been a boxing champion, and who knows where his life could have taken him. But there's also the possibility that it would have gotten him in deep trouble, considering Night City's cutthroat environment. Vic had to resist the allure of the promise of Night City legend. Humans have ambition built into them, and it is hard to resist it, even when we know pursuing it is not always the best idea. But Vic did resist, and that is a strong example of the kind of guy that he is. But like every story in Night City, there is no beating the setting that is very much a present character in this universe. In the Phantom Liberty ending, after V has been missing for approximately 2 years, when you go to see Vic again, he comes off as sort of desperate. And yes, he's super relieved to see you again. And hey, I don't know anybody who would be happy to see Victor Vector again. But he just seems so tired. He's lost Misty, his rock, that anchor of the soul that she sort of is to a lot of people. After Zetatech bought him out, Vic is all alone and he is falling apart from the inside. The quiet life is not necessarily a happy ending. Vic is now a reluctant servant to corporate greed. And it's because of how unfair and unforgiving life in Night City is. There's no happy endings there. Jackie is long gone, and Misty has decided to leave this city before it can consume her, in the way that it is now consuming Vic. V is a lifeline for him, and that personal want to do more good than bad that he wishes he could truly hold himself to. And I can only hope that this emergence of a reminder of his past proves one that can truly change Victor's life for the better. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. This is an old quote from a bygone era, but it's just as relevant today as it's ever been. And in a place like Night City, doubly so. We can all relate to the struggle of maintaining a positive outlook in a world that seems geared towards our own degradation. We're surrounded by poverty, the extinction of the middle class, late-stage capitalism, war, crime, and costly lies. Night City is allegorical for our own world, just cranked up for those of us in the present day to truly see it. In the future depicted in 2077's Night City, it's likely and honestly understandable why people succumb to the emotional death of this environment. To be a happy, positive person takes a lot of strength. We see this in characters like Vic, or Jackie, or Judy, but none more so than Misty Olszewski. Some might roll their eyes at what Misty has to say and her tarot card readings, but what lies behind it all is a character with remarkable strength. Through loss and hardship, Misty still maintains hope and grace, finding a unique balance throughout her story that accepts the realities of the world that she lives in, but also the power of her own choice in it. Misty was born in April of 2051 in the Haywood borough of Night City. She actually knew Jackie Wells growing up, but neither of them were close enough to really know where their futures would take them. At some point, Misty would leave Night City, likely staying with family in Poland. But Misty admits that she missed the humdrum of the place that she grew up. The noise and the energy and even the people. That was her thing, and so she returned. But not to blend in or to be co-opted by the corporate machine, not to join the Valentinos like so many of the kids she grew up with, or to get swallowed up by that mercenary lifestyle. We don't know exactly when, but in Misty's early 20s, she opened up her own esoterica shop in Watson. A business focusing on spiritual health seems like a lost cause in a place as morally comatose as Night City. But to Misty, it was the place that most needed that kind of help. A part of Misty was dejected by how few people actually had an interest in her own beliefs. And I don't believe it's out of just feeling frustrated that her business wasn't doing well or that New Age spiritualism wasn't that popular. To Misty, the help that she sought to provide in her own unique way had helped her maintain a healthy balance in this world. And she genuinely wanted to help others feel happier and at peace in the way that she herself had found it. Even when it came to the few people who did come into her store, sometimes just one person a day. As she says, one time it was just a pizza guy who went to the wrong place. Misty could not help but wonder if these people just nodded and asked questions and let her go on just to be polite. And Misty, despite even her own insecurities and financial challenges, refuses to give up because she's not a shill. Yes, she owns a business that has to make money to continue to exist, but she's one of those rare people in Night City whose entire business is motivated by helping others. One of the only churches we can find in Night City hits it on the nose with those cleanse your sins for a small fee machines. Whereas Misty is selling more than just a service or a product or a brief experience. She just wants to actually help people find balance and reconnect with their humanity. I just want to emphasize, as someone who is irreligious and not at all that spiritual, Misty is such a lovable character, because she's one of those rare people who's just genuinely trying to do good in an otherwise difficult, rough world. You just get the vibe that she's not concerned about people necessarily believing in the same thing she does, or buying all the things that she sells. But rather, Misty cares about whether or not she can help other people find true peace and happiness in whatever way that can come about for them. Her business is just the language that she uses to get that kind of encouragement across. Her strength of character and deep compassion for others is what makes her so important to V's story, as well as the overarching story of Cyberpunk 2077. At some point prior to 2076, Misty was approached by Victor Vector, Watson's most famous Ripper Doc. Vic was looking for a place to set up shop, and Misty ended up renting out the basement behind her shop to him. From here, the landlord and her tenant became very close friends. According to the Codex, Misty actually serves as a nurse half the time for Vic. And she's not doing this for extra money. Misty does it because when she sees someone who needs help, she wants to help. That was her whole motivation for opening up her esoterica shop in the first place. And she can see that Vic is a good person in a city where that is super rare, and she knows that he and her have aligned interests in the well-being of others. Vic's not just some chop shop in a dark alley. He's a respectable businessman in a back alley with a heart. Vic and Misty present as two sides of the human coin, one who specializes in the human body, and the other being the side that specializes in the human soul. They are a fascinating duo in a world where what it means to be human is challenged every day. I actually find that Vic and Misty stand as the perfect opposite to cyberpsychosis, sort of that necessary prep for anybody getting chipped. At least insofar as I understand it. According to Mike Pondsmith, in a Reddit comment he actually made concerning the subject of cyberpsychosis, he said that, quote, Cyberpsychosis is a disorder that, in part, depends on the subject's overall internal susceptibility. Just like every person who drinks a lot at parties doesn't end up an alcoholic in the gutter, not everyone who gets loaded up on cyberware is going to automatically go cyberpsycho. You have to have an inherent susceptibility. He goes on to say that the humanity stat used in the tabletop version of Cyberpunk to measure the level of resistance that a character has to cyberpsychosis depends on a lot of things. It's far more complex than just a simple stat. Humanity includes the ability to empathize with other people, to show kindness and compassion, and also how you fare coming out of stress or other traumas that you might endure in playing the game. Well, not just you, but I'm sure there's some trauma, especially if Adam Smasher comes out in the tabletop. I hear that's traumatic for the players as well as the characters. My point is that Vic and Misty are two of the most human-conscious characters that you can meet in Night City. They are the most humanity-conscious introduction to the world of cyberware. Everybody in Night City is chipping in, and it's harder and harder to survive without augmenting yourself, even just in order to defend yourself. Night City is basically an arms race. While Vic can provide that with humanity and expertise, Misty is the kind of person who shows a lot of care and empathy for those people. For those willing to listen, she can help to guide someone through an existential struggle brought on by cyberware, or their own philosophical beliefs about what it is to be human. I would even go so far as to say that that is how Misty's esoterica has remained open this whole time, largely due to Vic's rent, of course, but I would bet that most of her clientele are Vic's patients. And that, I believe, is how Misty reconnected with the man that she would fall in love with. While it's not confirmed, it is very likely that Jackie reconnected with Misty through his relationship with Vic. Vic likely knew Jackie from boxing, and from there, he went to him as a Ripper Doc. We see Jackie making eyes at Misty as far back as that montage with V, back in 2076. And while we don't see much of the two together, just from their first and only scene together, we can see that these two are smitten. It is very cute. V can even tell Misty that Jackie talked about her all the time. After the Sandra Dorset gig in 2077, Jackie actually asks to borrow V's car so he can take Misty out for a real date, not on the subway, in a sort of style. And when he tells the cop at the Watson blockade that he needs to get home to his girl that same night, Jackie's not just saying this to be cheeky or to manipulate her into letting them in. He means it, and I think that's also why it works on the cop, because he's telling the truth. Jackie adores Misty, but we don't feel the real punch of that fact until after the Konpeki heist goes down the tubes. Before the Konpeki heist, Misty tries to warn Jackie about avoiding mean reds. In that same conversation, he actually interrupts and dismisses her, which obviously hurts her. Misty and Jackie have some tension surrounding this upcoming job, as Jackie is resistant to any warnings or concerns surrounding Dexter Deshawn. Jackie is so determined to make it big and to have enough money to provide for Misty and for his mom and to just get out of the gutter, that he refuses to see the forest through the trees. He doesn't want to acknowledge how shady Dex is and how risky this is. Misty is eventually proven right, as Konpeki Tower glows with blood-red lights the further the mission goes. The No-Tell Motel also has a very red color code. Dexter Deshawn is saturated with red in his character design. As Jackie lays dying in the Delamain after the heist's disaster, he laments that his last real conversation with Misty was an argument about this job. Jackie tells V that Misty knew and that she always knew. Jackie dies still thinking about the girl that he loves and I think how he failed her, when Misty would never ever want him to think that. Yet Misty never breaks after this horrific loss. Misty is there to help V as Vic saves their life, and she is there after V finds out they're dying, to provide comfort when she herself is grieving. At this point, I don't even think it's been 3 days since Jackie's death. Misty wheels V back to their apartment, and she gives them omega blockers, pills that can help to suppress Johnny Silverhand's takeover of their mind, as well as pseudoendotrazine, medication that would hasten it. Right off the bat, we see Misty doing here what most other characters in Cyberpunk 2077 don't really do for V, at least insofar as I can recall. Misty immediately gets on the level with V about the nature of their condition and the inevitable and depressing end of the Relic's takeover, and is already accepting whatever V decides. Misty is, at least for me, saying here that she understands and feels for V's predicament, how impossibly difficult it is. Misty then gives V a necklace that she made, using the bullet that killed V as a lucky charm. To me, this necklace is Misty's way of passing on a symbol of hope to someone who really needs it. After all, when you hear of someone getting shot in the head, point blank, you automatically assume that they're dead. The fact that V came out of that at all, even if it's only because the relic brought them back to life and all that stuff, it is still crazy. V has walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and for all they and Misty know, there could very well still be a chance to bend the odds, as impossible as they seem. Even if Jackie was a victim to those odds, that V beat them in a very roundabout way is still something. It's something hopeful. V holds their greatest struggles in their hand. A hand warm with pumping blood from a miraculously living heart. Misty is one of the few people in the whole game to really set aside her own feelings about V's potential loss, about V being her friend, in order to show compassion and kindness and care to somebody who is dying a nightmarish death. But in Misty's deep care for V and for others, I think Misty forgets to care for herself. She almost sets herself aside after Jackie's death, isolating herself under a cloak of grief, until she is brought back to life by the true and loving heart of Jackie Wells once again. So someone in the comments of one of my last videos, I think it was the Jackie one, made this point, and I am so sorry that I could not find your comment. I scrolled and I couldn't find it. I just watch, I missed it, but it hit my heart. So this person compared Misty finally seeing into Jackie's garage and into that private little area that was his bedroom as her finally seeing what was inside his heart and how genuine Jackie was, especially in regards to Misty. And that's such a beautiful truth. Before Jackie's Ofrenda begins, we find Misty sitting outside of Jackie's garage. She's got her knees hugged up to her chest and she's suffering in silence. Mama Wells is dismissive of her, downright rude, and that rejection pains the girl that her son was willing to take a bullet for. For Mama Wells, Misty did not fit the bill of the perfect daughter-in-law. Misty is different, and I don't think she's a stranger to feeling ostracized and ridiculed. I think, especially at this time, that hurts even more, as much as she might be used to it, unfortunately. Misty has no way of getting into Jackie's garage where he lived in his final days, as Mama Wells has the key. All Misty wants at this point is to just feel like she's close to Jackie again, and that is why she sits outside where he lived. Jackie was a man that she knew had so many different layers that so few knew the true Jackie. And I think Misty, in asking V about who Jackie was to them, I think Misty is actually wondering if she even did. I think it stems from Misty's own self-doubts mixing with her grief. Again, Misty is used to feeling ridiculed or like people think she's weird or she's crazy. So few people took Misty seriously or even saw the good she was trying to do, even if it might have been unconventional. Contrasted with how supportive and attentive Jackie was of who she is. Now that Jackie is gone, she can't help but review everything he said or everything they did together, all back in her head. This is the way that I see it, at least, because I've mourned like this, where I have questioned everything in the past. Doubts, regrets, and what ifs. Mama Wells gives V the key to her son's garage in order for V to have an offering to bring to the ofrenda, and Misty accompanies us here. Through Misty, we find out more and more about Jackie. In a way, in Misty being the character to guide us through the Jackie Wells we might not have known, to expand on the things that V thought they knew. Misty is showing us just how intimately she knew him, even if she herself is questioning it. But the real moment of this quest is when Misty sees that mandala drawn on Jackie's coffee table, in that locked-off side room where she sees how deeply he held her in his heart. Misty is visibly shaken and moved, calling that mandala that Jackie had almost finished the most ugliest, beautiful thing she has ever seen. It was an ongoing project by the time Jackie died, and you can see the care and the detail he was putting into it. This mandala tells her that Jackie truly valued her. He valued her opinions, her wishes, and her beliefs, and he returned her feelings and her love for him. Jackie started drawing that mandala because Misty had mentioned to him that he could do it to clean up the energy of his garage. Only instead of just brushing this aside, Jackie actually took it to heart. Even if Jackie really didn't know how to draw a mandala, or what a mandala might even mean, or what Misty might even mean a lot of the time. He was putting in the effort to do this because he loved her, and he genuinely cared about what she cared about. Misty is so touched by this realization that Jackie never fibbed or patronized or just said stuff to her to make her feel better. There was no hidden mocking or anything. Jackie loved Misty. There is so much packed into this tiny, dingy little room. And it is right here in this moment that I believe Misty begins to grow. She grows beyond those self-doubts and further strengthens herself to accept the things that she can't control, like how seriously people take her or how much help she may be able to provide to people, and to recognize what is in her control. And I think that that's because in Jackie's acknowledging of her and genuine feelings and respect for her, that it didn't ultimately matter what other people thought. She saw the good that she did for Jackie, and the good that Jackie did for her. And even if at the end of the day, the only person that Misty could help was just one person, that wasn't meaningless. And that whole concept just makes me think of that one scene in the first season of Game of Thrones where Robert asks Cersei, what's the bigger number, 5 or 1? And he holds up 5 fingers and then a fist for 1. And that's just what I think Jackie proved to Misty. The power of one person who is determined enough to make a difference, even if that difference is not quantitative, is not something to scoff at. After all, she herself knew the power of just what one person's genuine care and love could do. After the ofrenda, Misty is still there for V, and she remains there right up until the end of the game. One kind of funny and sort of sad conversation you can have with Misty depends on whether or not you encourage Mama Wells to be welcoming and kind to Misty. And if you go down this path, Misty is actually irritated with Mama Wells because she feels like Mama Wells is doting on her so much in order to replace Jackie with her. And it's cute but sad because that's Mama Wells' way of grieving, but it's also sort of stepping on Misty's own space that she needs, and you only hope that they'll be able to work things out. Misty also serves as a sort of anchor for V, with her always being an open ear for them as they decline over the course of the game. She is there to, for instance, examine all the tarot cards that we can scan around the city. Like, she wants to help as best she can, so V knows that they're not alone. I only wish there was maybe more dialogue to have with her. I think it would have been cool if she had more to say about each stage of the main questline beyond her tarots and whatnot. Part of me is willing to bet that to Misty, even if, sure, not that many people are buying what she's selling, for her to know that she can serve as a friend and a philosopher and a center of balance for somebody who is in as precarious a position as V is, where their soul is battling to exist each day with Johnny's. I'm sure Misty never imagined she'd be helping somebody with this exact situation, but this is what I'm sure she feels she was meant to do. There's nobody better suited to be there as a touchstone for V than Misty. But otherwise, Misty can provide tarot readings for V all throughout the course of the game. It's quite interesting to sort out all the hints and kind of come up with who's who in the tarot cards. I would love to do that in another video, so I won't be getting into it here. However, the most interesting part of her readings has to do with the readings that she gives in the endings. They are extremely accurate and in some cases very concerning. Before V decides what final fate they will choose, Misty takes them up to the rooftop of her esoterica shop. She tells us that this is where she and Jackie used to sit before big jobs, where she would help to ease Jackie's worries and they would just have their final moments before Jackie would enter a dangerous situation. But Misty doesn't try to sway us in any way, just like she did in giving us medication and accepting that we would have to make a choice anyway. Misty still accepts that V will do what they will do. She's not going to be pushy or reluctant. I think a part of Misty is probably even a little bit worried about saying her opinion, considering what happened with Jackie and their final argument. Anybody who's ever parted ways with someone after an argument or not the greatest conversation only for that person to pass away or disappear, that is a regret. Ultimately, Misty gives V grace here and understanding. Both she and Vic do this throughout the game. And in the end, Misty gives V that final respect that I think is really important for V to decide for themselves their fate. In almost all the endings, Misty will give us at least one tarot card reading in the credits, plus 2 other ones before the driver comes to pick you up for some of the other endings. And the ones pertaining to the postgame can be fittingly eerie, specifically the ones where if you give your body over to Johnny, or if you side with Arasaka. However, in endings where if you side with Rogue and storm the tower, or if you go with Pan Am and the Aldecaldos and leave Night City for good, she gives you hopeful readings that paint an optimistic future for V. But the 2 endings that I think say the most about Misty here are the ones where V decides to take their own life, and the Phantom Liberty ending. The first ending is devastating for so many characters, as we see in their reactions in the end credits, but none hit worse for me than Vic and Misty's reactions, especially Misty. First of all, for both, because you know that it was probably Vic and Misty who found V first. But Misty's ending credits message here is it's simply heart-wrenching in just how simple it is. It's delivered very calmly and Misty just saying like it is. Misty says that V had so many more people that cared about them than they thought, and that while she accepts that that was V's choice to make, that choice did hurt a lot of people very deeply. She's brokenhearted all over again far too soon after Jackie's death. But she still shows grace. She wishes V a hopeful farewell, hoping to see them again someday, as well as Jackie. I'm not saying that Misty's reaction makes this ending the best ending, but what she says here shows truly how strong a person Misty is. She's almost certainly grieving, and she's probably numb and traumatized. Who knows how much loss she has experienced before Jackie, but Misty never gets angry. I think she knows that anger is not the solution for her, and I just love how calmly honest she is here. Phantom Liberty, however, has an ending that I think is an excellent send-off for Misty, and a beautiful end to her story. We see Misty after V has been absent for 2 years, when she finds V knocked out cold on the streets. When she finds us, it's like an old light has come back to our life, especially considering everybody else has kinda left us. Even if you romanced Carrie or River or Pan Am or Judy, none of them come back. Which makes sense to me because it has been 2 years and you didn't really know these people for that long anyway, but still it's just like, wow, ouch. But Misty is here and she is so happy to see us. And here she is in Jackie's jacket with Mama Wells' hair, ready to pull us away from this hallway of mean reds. I'm hoping that Misty's new haircut and her wearing Jackie's jacket means that she ended up having a much better relationship with Mama Wells over the last 2 years. I really hope so, because I think that would be important for Mama Wells as well. Misty's shop was bought out by Zetatech, who also got Vic on their payroll. Misty and Vic have a strained relationship at the moment, and Misty has sort of hardened to the encroachment of Night City's habit of winning. How nothing is the same anymore. She said the final straw for her closing her business was when her favorite tea herbal remedy shop was burnt down. She tells V that because she had lost balance, she didn't think she could help anybody else find balance. Vic's selling out to Zetatech was also something that deeply affected Misty, as both she and Vic admit to V. Vic describes Misty as a sensitive soul, and he's not wrong. Misty actually starts smoking after Vic joins Zetatech and she closes down her shop. That creeping consumption of Night City was so close to her. The only other person she cared about had given into the city's harsh realities, and this really hurt her. Misty had a rough time for the last while before V came back, and I think in having more of the Wells family in her appearance is a sign that she was turning to Jackie's memory and to Mama Wells for guidance. I also think, at least to an extent, that Jackie's memory is one thing that held Misty in Night City. To leave for a long time might have meant that she was leaving him behind, at least in her mind. But by the time we actually meet her 2 years later, I think Misty's decided that that is not true. Misty tells V that she's, in fact, leaving Night City for good within the next few minutes, going to an ancient forest in Poland. She's gonna go and live a better, happier life and find a new beginning. And in taking Jackie's jacket with her, it's almost like she is taking Jackie out of Night City at long last. Jackie died trying to provide for the women that he loved, and I think to eventually get Misty out of Night City as well. In this ending, Misty is the one sort of saving him. But she still chooses to spend her last moments in Night City with the newly returned V, who now has a new and mysterious life ahead of them. Misty admits that it seems like her peace of mind will likely be lost again and regained again in different ways each time as life goes on, given how the world is one of change. But Misty resolves to not give up, accepting that, yes, the world is rough, but no matter where she goes, she will find that peace again. And such is life. There are ups and downs in and beyond Night City. Before Misty gets in the Delamain to leave, she asks V about their bullet necklace, and when V says that they must have misplaced it, Misty tells them not to go looking for it. And I think this is Misty's way of telling V that the past is now behind them. They're here right now, and they have only forward to go. Memories of struggles and challenges can help a person get through a tough time, but after a certain point, it is healthy to let go and to move on, just as Misty herself is now about to do. Misty leaves V with the final wish of her old friend finding peace and joy, of realizing that starting anew is fully within their grasp, as hopeless as it might feel. In a cruel and brutal world like Cyberpunk's, like ours, that choice is one of the sure things that we have, as impossible as it might feel. And I think for Misty to leave us with that beautiful and harsh truth, as well as V's little smile at the end, it's a reminder that no matter what, as bleak as the hour might seem, that choice will always be yours. Few characters encapsulate that mixture of fear and a thirst for power that Meredith Stout shows in the very few scenes she's in. As a militech corpo, she is the introduction to Arasaka's chief rival in the Cyberpunk universe, and she is remembered long after her last appearance for a variety of reasons. Her presence in the game is extremely small in the overarching scheme of things, and while yes, her story is technically concluded no matter what path you choose, it always felt like there was something more to Meredith that we didn't quite get. And certainly something more to Militech, a corporation that, despite its importance in the cyberpunk universe, seems oddly absent from the final narrative. In this video, we will be discussing what many believe is one of the most unfortunate pieces of cut content in the entirety of Cyberpunk 2077, that some believe was repackaged and repurposed for Phantom Liberty. And this lost plot would have likely started, and potentially even finished, with the one and only Meredith Stout. Meredith is a higher-ranking militech corpo that we meet in the beginning of the Konpeki heist questline. Meeting Meredith is entirely optional, as you don't necessarily need to work with her in order to get the flathead. But should you work with her, you see one of the best examples of what a corpo is like: manipulative, ruthless, and entirely self-interested. While Meredith's design conveys the power, efficiency, and authority of the entity that she works for, this facade is contrasted by her rash and impulsive behavior. When first meeting V, Meredith extends her hand and greets them politely, only for it to be a front for her men to restrain them. Meredith antagonizes V and accuses them of being a part of the plot that she is trying to foil. And this isn't just because Meredith enjoys inflicting pain on others, as some of us may later see, because at that moment, her head is more or less resting on a corpo chopping block. Meredith's fate hinges on discovering the mole who allowed militech technology to be stolen by Maelstrom. She is certain it's Anthony Gilchrist, a fellow corpo, which she is actually right about. Inside the All Foods plant, V can find an email that only those with the nomad background can fully understand, which proves that Anthony is in fact the mole. Meredith's intuition is correct, but intuition is not enough to give to her superiors as proof. And if Meredith can't prove Anthony's guilt, then she has failed in her investigation. She risks looking incompetent or even suspect. Meredith knows that the corpo power ladder is dog eat dog. After all, she herself has climbed it. If she can't get results, being demoted is the best case scenario. If Gilchrist can somehow sneak out of this trap, she could very well be screwed, especially considering her harsh treatment of him while he's been in custody. This is perhaps one of the strongest hints of Meredith's impulsivity and potentially even sadism. But Meredith is not stupid. In typical corpo fashion, when she sees an opportunity, she seizes it, even if it wounds her pride to do so. And this shows in her last-second gamble with V. In the case that Meredith gives V some spiked eddies to give to Maelstrom. She plays this off as an easy thing for V to do for her, as well as pay for the flathead that V wants, which is suspicious, but 10,000 eddies is a lot for a small merc to hand over. And let's face it, when you're playing a V that is flat broke, odds are you're gonna use the money even if it is suspicious. Meredith guarantees that she will allow you to leave with the flathead, no questions asked, should you do this little thing, so why wouldn't you? But, as we see if we use her money, she was absolutely willing to throw V under the bus. Because as soon as Maelstrom puts the eddies in their system, the virus uploads and mayhem ensues. Meredith gets the information that she needs, and V wipes out some of Maelstrom's top leadership. However, if you refuse to go along with Meredith's game, Anthony Gilchrist comes out on top and takes over Meredith's position at Militech. And just like that, Meredith disappears. But that's not the last we can see of her, even if it is super easy to miss where she ends up. I personally didn't know about this for most of my playthroughs, but Meredith's body can be found on the ocean floor, weighted by concrete blocks and showing signs of torture. But in the case that we do take Meredith's eddies and use them to pay for the flathead held by Maelstrom, Meredith comes out on top. She gets enough information to prove that Anthony is the mole and has him disposed of. Meredith remarks that she and V work well together, her previous desperation now nowhere to be seen. Secure in her position once again, Meredith is now back to her authoritative self, almost nonchalant about nearly getting V killed. V can either choose to be angry with her here, or you can agree that you do work well with her, which leads to V getting one of the best melee weapons in the entire game. I cannot show you this weapon, and I cannot show you the context of how this weapon is received. However, its name being Sir John Falstaff should be enough information to get the message across. It speaks for itself. But that is it. That's all we see of Meredith for the rest of the game. You never get to work with Meredith again, and she tells you this through text, rather than a final conversation face-to-face. Aside from V's possible liaison with her at the No-Tell Motel, it's like Meredith ceases to exist, and that is a shame. And at first, this doesn't really seem all that odd. Meredith was a side character in a very early quest, and we can't possibly know everything there is to know about every character that we meet. V is not meant to know every story in Night City. There's also some closure that we get with Meredith that we don't necessarily get with every other side character, even if it's not all that much to write home about. You could even say that it's realistic, and we're lucky we got those loose ends tied at all. It's not hard to believe that Meredith would just never contact us again, period. All of these reasons are all well and good until you start digging deeper into the game. Until you start to wonder that maybe Meredith's ends weren't so much tied as much as they were actually severed. I'll be the first to admit that Meredith could very well have just been intended as an introductory character to the corpo side of Cyberpunk. Meredith could have been intended as a showcase for the corpo aesthetic, or the corpo mindset to help with world building. Aside from Jenkins in the corpo intro, Meredith is our first major corpo character that we meet in the game. For me, Meredith is more memorable than any of the Arasakas. She's just scary, and Erica Lindbeck knocks it out of the park with her performance. And she helps to establish the brutality of the corpo power ladder that our V could have potentially once climbed. But the fact that we barely get any militech in the base game at all, after this period of what feels like an introduction to the corporation, feels like a bit of a void, almost. Through Meredith, we get the base of some world building to establish Militech as a rival corporation in the setting of Night City, right down to Meredith's unique design, as well as the Militech vehicles and military we can see throughout the game. Considering all the effort that went into designing Militech and Meredith, it feels odd that they sort of fall off the map. If you think about it, there is a lot of Militech in Cyberpunk's first chapter. The optional tutorial with T-Bug is played in a hacked Militech training simulator. The Flathead, key to the heist, is Militech technology. And whether you side with Meredith or Gilchrist here, both of those people will give V the Flathead under the table. No questions asked, and no hassle from Militech. When it comes to the heist, there's just a lot of Militech being involved. This doesn't necessarily mean that Militech is directly involved in the heist, but there is a presence here that is so strange how we don't really see it again. Also, there are two easily missable audio files that you can find on the Ebonica later on in 2077. Both of these files involve Adam Smasher, who is working with some Maelstrom gangers to hold hostage somebody that Anthony Gilchrist knows. In this recording, Adam Smasher tells Anthony to stop a certain deal that Militech is making with NightCorp. This plan to have leverage by using this hostage presumably did not work, as we do find the woman's body on the ship. I can't help but wonder if this is a hint that Gilchrist was involved with Arasaka somehow, and that Maelstrom was just a middleman. Maybe this is part of a quest where later on we would discover that Anthony was working with Arasaka. And lastly, but not at all least important, is that somebody discovered in the game files the unfinished interior of the Militech building in the Corpo Plaza. You can find numerous videos exploring this unfinished interior on YouTube. For me, this is solid proof that, at least in some way, shape, or form, Militech was supposed to have a much bigger presence in the overall story. Meredith's line about working together might not have just been a throwaway thing. Maybe it actually meant something before this quest or quest line was scrapped. And I can't help but wonder if, somehow, Phantom Liberty is all that remains of this initial plotline for Militech. And I think it would have had a lot to do with the heist. In Cyberpunk lore, Militech has a long-standing, violent history with Arasaka. The two corporations have been fighting each other for economic power, especially in Night City. Although, unfortunately for Militech, this has not been successful, as Arasaka is still the dominant corporation in Night City. However, Militech has not been unsuccessful in all of their power grabs. Even if the NUSA is a different entity in name, Militech basically holds the reins of its government. We see this very clearly in Phantom Liberty, with the fact that NUSA President, Rosalind Myers, is the ex-CEO of Militech. Many in the NUSA actually protest her running for a second term in power, because of the fact that Militech interests will remain NUSA interests. Myers is not unlike Meredith in the sense that we see her regularly being manipulative, as well as self-interested, completely willing to use other people and sacrifice them as well. With this political power at the corporation's disposal, Militech can better serve as a proper rival to Arasaka. They have more reach and resources and personnel who can carry out their interests. And one of these resources is a certain agent mentioned in a file that we can find on Space Force 1 when V boards the wreckage to find Rosalind Myers, the very first mission of Phantom Liberty. And in this report, titled Konpeki Incident Report Number 6, we discover that Militech knew some insider knowledge of Dexter Deshawn's final gig. And it's all thanks to an agent by the name of Informant 01257. And there's some really good reason to believe that we actually met this informant at the beginning of the game. Because, as somebody pointed out on Reddit, who I will say, I could not find the thread where I read this. It was a comment on a thread whose name I can't even remember. I am so sorry, but I did not find out this information. I just read it and it blew my mind. The 12th letter of the alphabet is L. The 5th is E, and the 7th is G. If you're willing to rework the 0 to an O, you get the name Oleg. And who do we know who is involved in the heist, who is a mysterious individual whose name is Oleg? Oleg Darkovich is the name of Dexter Deshawn's mysterious bodyguard, a character with very little to say and little to do, who also happens to be decked out in cyberware that suspiciously resembles military-grade stuff. Interesting coincidence, isn't it? In this report, the supposed informant was said to disappear before he could access more information concerning whoever was involved in the heist. To me, that Oleg did not report in implies that he was killed by Takamura. Although, as we see in the 2019 cinematic trailer for Cyberpunk, we see that V actually kills Oleg. It's likely that this was jumbled up due to the late-stage rewrites of the game. Perhaps they felt that it created more hopelessness in V's death scene, with Oleg not being killed. And finally, in the report, it is mentioned that Militech knows that Johnny is on the relic. rather than this supporting a giant elaborate theory for a hidden plot line that is still in the game, to me, this reference to this informant, who is very likely to be Oleg, is a nod to a story that was cut. It feels a little jarring and out of place. And for me, as much as I love Phantom Liberty, it also feels like an assembly of cut plot lines that were once initially intended to be in the game in the first place. Having Dogtown locked away like it is before Phantom Liberty was, at least I think, a symptom of the unfinished development of Cyberpunk 2077 that was unfortunately repackaged and repurposed as an expansion to be purchased. But the main thing that makes me think that Phantom Liberty was intended to be in the base game is because of how the ending you can unlock with that expansion is arguably one of the most meaningful endings in the entire game. Phantom Liberty is more engaging, in my opinion, than the entirety of the main questline. And I get this feeling that it's one of those plot lines that got axed, but they still managed to carry out in the form of releasing it as an expansion. There's a very interesting theory that Alex's story in Phantom Liberty was recycled from T-Bug. Some believe that T-Bug was a militech agent. I can't find concrete proof of this, aside from the fact that T-Bug's icon appears at the Cynosure facility that we can enter in Phantom Liberty, which is definitely an interesting thing. But I haven't really been able to find all that much proof proving this point, as much as I am intrigued by it, so maybe at a future date I'll delve into that. I can't help but wonder, considering Militech's involvement with the NUSA, with Oleg Darkovich likely being a Militech agent, with the strange base game omission of Dogtown then being repackaged as an expansion, and the elaborate ending of Phantom Liberty, that there was a whole plotline V could have chosen involving Meredith and Militech, and the reveal that the heist was a Militech-supported op, which would organically lead to a chain of events that could kickstart Phantom Liberty. Maybe Militech was helping with the heist because they wanted the relic, or maybe they knew that Saburo Arasaka wanted to use it to extend his life. It is noted that Rosalind Myers, in the ending that Saburo does come back, is publicly opposed to his resurrection. After all, he is a big threat to Militech domination. I feel like it's entirely possible that Militech could have found out that this was supposed to happen, and maybe their questline would have been to stop it. Considering Songbird's ability to mess around with the relic in V's head, as well as her value to Militech and the NUSA, her character could have had, at least at one point, had something to do with seizing control of relic tech. And for Meredith as a character herself, I can't help but think that once upon a time there was a whole plot line for her. She's so unique in the way that she looks and memorable, and she's especially well played. If I hadn't read that she and Misty have the same voice actor, I never would have known. If you put any stock in the theory that the Cyberpunk life paths were supposed to lead to vastly different storylines you could play throughout the game, Meredith would be the missing corpo romance that is just lacking in the final story. For Street Kid Vs, there's Judy. For Nomad Vs, there's Pan Am, and for Corpo, there would be Meredith. Meredith would have been that ruthless, more morally questionable romance option that is not available for V in the final game. Maybe Meredith would have been the only romance option to stick around while you were in that 2-year coma. Maybe choosing to help Songbird would have led to Meredith's death, adding some interesting dilemmas and consequences to the story. Who knows, maybe Meredith's relationship could have started as purely physical and then potentially evolves into a very sweet, interesting romance. Most romances in Cyberpunk are pretty typical, which isn't a bad thing, but it would have been interesting to see what Meredith would have been like, even if she is terrifying. But unfortunately, we never get to see this development. We are only left with fragments that are memorialized with that one quite likely mention of Oleg Darkovich. And it exists in such a way that rather than seeming just like a cool little nod, it makes us wonder what we could have had. My read on Meredith and her importance and Militech's importance could very well be wrong, but my overall point with this fiction forensics is to highlight the importance of a fleshed out, completed, and cleaned up narrative. It's unfortunately unsatisfying when there's still evidence of a diced up plotline that was not removed with the surgical precision that it probably should have been. Like, even if the old story's been given concrete shoes and thrown overboard, there's still the chance the concrete shoes can come off and that body gets floating up to the surface. Which unfortunately is what has kinda happened. They did not dispose of the remains properly. Oh geez. But I think it's unfortunately likely that the mystery of what we could have gotten will remain unsolved. But I also just want to say, after all is said and done, Phantom Liberty is where Cyberpunk truly shines for me. You can feel the passion and the love and the dedication and attention to detail in the entire story of Phantom Liberty, and I loved every second of it. Every character is fascinating. And I think it's because they had the time to complete it the way that I'm sure that the devs wish they could have completed the entire game. They were able to complete the creative process, and I will always look at Phantom Liberty and wonder if the rest of Cyberpunk 2077 could have matched it, had it been given the same respect. Humanity has always had a fascination with cautionary tales, as well as a penchant to disregard them. We think to ourselves that we're different from those people. We can succeed where those before us have failed. We can resist this or overcome that. But the reality is that as human beings, we are incredibly flawed and fallible. Most of us learn through our own mistakes. Or at least we hopefully do. But some people never quite reach that point where the ego gives way to the harsher truths of reality. Characters like Dexter Deshawn are an excellent example of this archetype, flying too high on wax wings. But despite his rise and dramatic fall, Dex did reach a whole new height in terms of how blinded one can be by their lust for power. Dex is one of those rare characters to survive a fall from grace in Night City. That's an achievement unto itself. But as we see throughout the events of Cyberpunk 2077, his second chance at a better life, a quiet life, was wasted. Just as wasted as he was after his final failure to understand that Night City does not suffer those who regret. Whether or not Dex is a Night City native, he is certainly interested in the wealth and power one can hustle from its streets. Dex is no stranger to the ruthless game played among its more successful players. And Dex, more than anything else, wanted to be one of those big players. Long before V and Jackie started their stint as mercs, Dex was an influential fixer in the Afterlife circuit. Some people theorize that Dex was actually the big fixer in Pacifica before Mr. Hands, but I haven't been able to dig up any solid evidence on that assumption. But I do like that idea. To me, the idea that Dex was once such a heavy-hitting fixer fits nicely with his desperate attempts to get back into the upper echelons of Night City's fixers. Dex was known for aiming big with the gigs that he would take. Even if Dex had never worked as a mercenary himself, he was still excellent at assembling a team and identifying strengths and weaknesses of its members. And another thing to note is that Dex was not shy about throwing these mercenaries under the bus if things got a little too hot to handle. Dex would always get his cut of the action based on his charisma and his own network of connections. Very few mercs who worked with Dex at this time would ever contest the split of the earnings, because Dex had the supposed power to blacklist whoever he wanted, or, if he was in the mood, to have this mercenary taken out of the picture. He cultivated this veil of unpredictability, and it served him well enough to make a known name for himself, whether or not there was any stock in it. Ultimately, Dex developed a reputation of being a high-risk, high reward kind of fixer, both in terms of the jobs he chose as well as for the people who worked with him. Dex had the surface persona of what he calls Mr. Cool. He explains this persona to V as a sort of veiled threat, implying that while he can be chill on the surface, Dex can be vicious if somebody ever tried to screw him over. And while this was probably a threat to be wary of once upon a time, most of Dex's bargaining power has fizzled out by 2077, which explains why Dex was scraping the barrel for a job that you would think he would want the best mercs in the business for. The reason for this is arguably one of the most well-known screw-ups of any fixer in Night City's recent memory, that we, the player, happen to know very little about. No character ever actually sits down and explains the whole incident in full detail, but there are some hints that help us piece together the puzzle that dragged Dex DeShawn to his deservedly underwhelming demise. Sometime between 2074 and 2075, Dex headed a gig in Pacifica. This gig started a gang war that would ravage the area, and also helped to create the combat zone that we all know and love by 2077. Pacifica's been screwed up for a long time, but this job apparently resulted in it being even worse, which is saying something. Details on this gig are scarce, but one of our best sources is a certain member of the animals in Rancho Coronado. Rhino is somebody you can fight in the boxing quest, Beat on the Brat. Rhino doesn't really have a lot to say to V about this gig, but rather you can read about it in an interview-style post by CD Projekt Red called Humans of Night City. In this fictional interview, Rhino details how she joined the animals and got into boxing, and it's actually here that we get one of the only detailed accounts of just what went down in Pacifica that sent Dex running. At least if we accept that this story is about that same gig. I personally think it is because there are too many details that line up very snug. In Rhino's interview, she says that this last gig of hers took place around 2 years ago, which does line up with the time that Dex left on his long-term vacation, as he likes to call it. Rhino actually mentions that the runner she worked with on this job was a girl with a fondness for classical philosophy. Rhino even says that she hopes this runner has retired to that Greek island she spoke about so often. I think it is pretty safe to say that this runner was T-Bug. Rhino continues to say that this job ended up blowing up in their face, as whatever they stole and whoever they stole it from were not too thrilled. The animals were out for blood. And Rhino only narrowly got her and Bug out of this situation because Rhino beat the animals who challenged her to a fight. And this is ironically how she ended up joining the animals, because that was one of their initiation rituals. Rhino also details that the fixer they were working with turned tail as soon as things got too hot. This fixer dropped off the face of the earth, leaving Rhino and T-Bug to fend for themselves. Whether these two ultimately managed to steal that item the gig was all about, or if it was software even, we don't know. But whatever happened, it is heavily implied that this fixer was Dex. The dates line up, Bug's involvement, and the sudden fixer disappearing from Night City after a really bad job in Pacifica. If this isn't about Dex, then it's a really crazy coincidence. Another bit of evidence that I think supports that this is in fact Dex's gig is the fact that Royce, when he mocks Dex, he mentions screwing over the animals in Pacifica, etc., which I think is a nice little cherry on top to this whole thing. The other thing that I want to note here is the possibility that Dex's screw-up actually helped the Voodoo Boys gain more power in Pacifica. It's hard to gauge the Voodoo Boys' level of power in the district because they are so secretive. We don't know anything about them, really, aside from what we see in their quests. But they do seem to have the most pull in the district. compared to animals or the scavs. The fact that Dex even feels comfortable contacting them to ask about Evelyn Parker says, to me at least, that Dex did not screw them over in the gang war. But one of the most interesting details from this whole theorized series of events that happened to do with Dexter's disastrous last job is the fact that I think Dexter actually fled to space! The very same place that he actually wants to flee to when the Konpeki heist is a disaster. This point alone sort of proves that Dexter genuinely has not learned anything from his past mistakes. He is repeating the process to a T. If V doesn't go to the bathroom in the no-tell motel, you can hear Dex making arrangements for a spaceflight escape for himself. The way Dex phrases this conversation to whoever he's speaking to implies that this is not the first time he has gone this route. The fact that Dex probably went to space 2 years ago implies that his original screw-up is way worse than we are explicitly told, and he likely left Rhino and T-Bug to fend for themselves. Dex mentions to V that Bug saved him at some point or other. I don't know if this has to do with the failed gig. It is interesting that T-Bug is still loyal to him after this potential abandonment. I think there's more information, I just haven't really been able to dig it up. But all in all, we can see Dex's history of biting off way more than he can chew. We see his inability to see through the mist of ambition, to know that he's just going to be stirring a pot that he's going to immediately regret. We see how easy Dex turns tail, and we see his tendency to throw others under the bus. And perhaps the most frustrating part of Dex's original failed gig is the fact that Dex did have a chance to start anew. Dex could have lived the quiet life if he actually wanted to. But even after his first major disaster, Dex still chooses to ignore his past mistakes and his own role in them. The only thing Dex takes from those events is his feeling of being wounded and bitter. He chose to repeat this same grave error, only on a much grander scale. Don't get me wrong, Cyberpunk 2077 is miles better than it used to be in so many ways, but Chapter 1 is full of holes. Like, the story still has its vital organs, so they're not plot-breaking holes, but you can't ignore these holes that are glaring at you about certain characters and certain things. Information that's half-mentioned and never explained. Chapter 1, at least to me, feels like it was completed last in development. And I think that's because they weren't sure if they'd be able to tie up all the loose ends that they start in the first chapter later on in the game. My biggest reason for thinking this is the way CDPR treated Phantom Liberty. I think the detail and the effort and the time that was allowed to be put into Phantom Liberty gives us a glimpse of what I think the developers really wanted the whole game to be like. They had time to make the story and the characters. In that sense, Phantom Liberty was better than the rest of the game, at least for me. Because the time and effort and detail was there and you could see it. And I love 2077. I think it has one of the better stories in video games that I've played. There's amazing characters and amazing quests, and the world building is phenomenal. But when you sit it next to the sheer level of detail of Phantom Liberty, and know about the troublesome time frame and burnout that occurred in the base game's creation, you can really feel the difference. 2077 is still phenomenal. It's just the fact that video game developers are often not given the respect due to what they have to do in order to make a quality product. The fact that the devs at CDPR were able to make the story as good as it is despite all these roadblocks is incredible. But you can still unfortunately see where them being rushed by the powers that be unfortunately left some voids in the game. For me, Phantom Liberty feels like an apology to the base game for not treating it with the level of care and love and detail that they wished they could have. The theory that I've half-baked in my head is that in the original plot of the game, the Voodoo Boys hired Dex to be an unsuspecting fall guy that would start a war in their favor. I like to think that the Voodoo Boys maybe saw Dex as the easiest fixer to manipulate, and they could convince him to smack the hornet's nest that was the animals. Maybe how T-Bug saved Dex was by forging evidence that blamed Scavs for the whole incident, at least for a while. Maybe because T-Bug was from Coastview, she had contacts in the Voodoo Boys that helped him out last second, or maybe she was a Voodoo Boy, and her job was ensuring that the gang had no digital footprint in this gig. Maybe T-Bug even saved Dex for her own ulterior motives, whether she was a part of the Voodoo Boys or not. Maybe she just saw Dex as a way to make money in order for her to someday retire to Crete. Even I'll be the first to admit that all of these half-baked ideas of mine are up in the air and pure speculation. But my overall point with having this kind of speculation is that this story feels like so much got cut. There are bits of this story that are left out in a way that doesn't feel natural. Like, you know when there's a setup in a story and you get the details peppered in about past events that you eventually put together and then you have your aha moment realizing what it all means? Dex's failure in Pacifica feels like it was intended to be one of those stories, but unfortunately never got off the ground. I feel like they didn't have enough time to tell it, so they axed it. One of the only traces we see of the potential of this story is T-Bug in the 2019 cinematic trailer, shown at E3 2019. This trailer was released about a year before the game's final release, after many delays. We see T-Bug in this trailer even resembling some of her original concept art. This gives me Maman Brigitte vibes, and I'm sad that they got rid of the coat. T-Bug looked cool. In this trailer, T-Bug betrays V. And some might say that this is just a trailer and it's not canon, and I actually do agree. I think you're right. This trailer is no longer canon. But I think at one point it was. This is a pretty deliberate thing, having T-Bug here in this scene where she is otherwise dead. Her design being what it is as well. I think initially T-Bug was intended to betray V, siding with Dex, and who knows what kind of history those two had together. I think that the devs had even more ideas for this storyline that just unfortunately could not be implemented in the final game, and it sucks. I tried really hard to come up with a reasonable theory for just what happened in Pacifica, but as I was thinking of it and trying to string together information, the one thought that kept coming to me is the feeling of all of these absences that were never filled. I will say, I do unfortunately think a lot of Dex's story, and T-Bug's as well, especially T-Bug's, was a victim of the crunch of the Cyberpunk 2077 dev time, but at the same time, when it comes to Dex at least, they did do a good job of leaving him mostly intact. Please tell me what you think of this thought of mine in the comments. If you have theories, I want to hear them, so please tell me. I am fascinated by all of these unknowns, and if anybody knows anything, because you guys tend to know things that make me go, whoa, like, it's always interesting, so let me know in the comments. Okay. Back to analysis time. After Dex fled Night City, his reputation crashed. Everybody in the mercenary scene of Night City knew that whatever happened in Pacifica, it had to do with Dex. The combat zone is as bad as it is now, in part because of Dexter Deshawn's big screw-up. Because he turned tail and fled, this likely made things look even worse. For him to flee, that said a lot about how much power this Mr. Cool actually had. Dex had clearly not planned for this failure or any potential blowback. Dex's true nature as a buffoon who utilized smoke and mirrors to hide his true ineptitude was finally exposed by himself. In his haste to reach the top, partnered with his own puffed-up impression of his own success, ultimately led him right back to the bottom. Dex was impatient and greedy, and he paid the price. Even though we know very little about the Pacifica gig, it's fairly safe to assume that there were many red flags that went right over Dexter's head, because that's exactly what happened with the Konpeki heist. The fixer Rogue even saw that this job was doomed, hence why she didn't take it. Dex's absence from Night City was as much for his own protection as it was an exile. None of the mercs he used to deal with would even look in his direction now. The fact that even Maelstrom ridicules Dex, when Maelstrom is often looked down on themselves, says a lot about where his reputation is. When Dex returns to Night City at the start of 2077, he cannot handle being viewed as a failure. I think Dex has a huge ego, and I think this is worsened by the fact that he does not have the chops to physically and mentally discipline and push himself to go and get glory for himself. Dex is too scared to take actual action, but he still wants the glory of being a Night City legend. Dex is good at talking and reading people, but that only goes so far. The only people who are dazzled by him now are mercs fresh on the scene. Mercenaries who were not in on what the veterans knew. Fortune hunting and glory-hungry kids like Jackie and V. Dex was now forced to work with flimsy nobodies to work his gigs. The reason why he took the Konpeki heist when he did was because he was desperate to rebuild his reputation. He wanted to be back in the big leagues, and he hated being looked down on by those who were smart enough to know that he was full of shit. One could argue that fixers are no different from your average Night City predator. They rely on the skills of other people, on the lives of other people. But even if you look at them that way, Dexter was a whole other kind of animal. One that, for a time, was able to talk the talk even if he didn't walk the walk. But in a city where you either evolve or you die, Dexter never did grow. Instead, he sat in his own failures and allowed himself to break down into a weaker and weaker person. Dex was ultimately unable to accept his own failures and actually use those failures and the knowledge they would have given him to build him into the fixer that he had always wanted to be. Sometimes you really don't know the true face of someone until it comes down to you or them, unless you were paying attention. Whatever one may think about the Konpeki heist questline, it's certainly not lacking in detail, especially when it comes to Dexter Deshawn. Throughout the heist questline, we get little specks here and there of Dexter's incompetence, insecurity, and low-brow manipulation of Jackie and V. There are so many red flags about Dex that you only really see with subsequent playthroughs of 2077. As we put all of these individual pieces together, we soon realize that Dex likely never intended for Jackie and V to make anything off of this job, let alone escape with their lives. In Dex's cold-blooded manipulation of these two mercs, he ironically sealed his own fate. And we can see that Dex had so many bad habits and impulses that would counter any of the benefits that he would have received from a successful heist. There was likely no longevity to his success anyway. Dex pulled that trigger on V with the desperation that he had been nursing all throughout the Konpeki questline, all until it matured to the point that he too met his end, alone and forgotten, under the quiet blaze of that California sun. One of the first hints of Dexter's true state of desperation is how he chooses to reach out to V and Jackie. Dexter uses T-Bug, a mutual acquaintance, to convince the two of them to even take a look at the job. Now, it's not so much the fact that Dex is using a middleman here, as it is the fact that Dex is trying to convince you to take the job. We don't know how easy it was to get Jackie on board, but I'm sure Dex didn't have to work too hard through T-Bug to get Jackie interested. But V, on the other hand, genuinely requires some degree of convincing. When it comes to Rogue, you have to convince her to give you a gig. With Dex, it's the other way around. The fact that Dex feels like he needs to approach from a perspective of, I must convince them to do this job, implies just how desperate he is for this gig to work. And I think it also shows that even he knows that this job is a big risk. He does say high risk, high reward, but I think that's his way of trying to downplay his own fear in order to impress V, potentially. He's trying to hide the ridiculous risk of the Konpeki heist behind this flair. But I will say there is an elephant in the room, especially with his choice of intermediary, given what we discussed in the last video I made on Dex. We can't help but wonder why T-Bug would even want to work for Dex again, after Dex quite possibly left her behind during that failed Pacifica job. I think that for T-Bug to even want to work with Dex again, she would have to have a bigger stake in whatever prize this heist is going to dole out to them. I actually think that Dex asked her to find two nobodies that she thought they could use for this heist, who unfortunately ended up being Jackie and V. This is one of those tidbits in the story that makes me think that T-Bug was meant to betray Jackie and V, but that story never quite made it to fruition. I'm gonna hold off on that tangent until I do T-Bug's video, so stay tuned for that, otherwise I will go off and get distracted. Another thing to note with Dex is that the first time V meets him, it's in his car. Not just out of coincidence, like our first meeting with the Padre in the Street Kid origin. V's meet with Dex is all set up beforehand, under a crappy overpass with a shootout happening just across the road. And I think that this is because Dex does not have a place of his own anymore. Every other fixer in the game has a spot that they claim, or at least multiple spots. Whereas Dex can't even walk into the afterlife like he used to. He's not meeting us in his car just to seem cool or to show off his car. Maybe that's how Jackie saw it even. A nice car, it shows off Dex's wealth, it gives this false promise to Jackie. Dex is meeting us in his car because he has nothing else. And the awkward location, I think, is another hint to his own paranoia. Dex is still scared of whoever might still be gunning for him, so keeping moving might seem like the best way to avoid a hit, maybe. I also think that this meeting and the way it is set up is a hint as to why Dex only gets us into the afterlife towards the end of the quest line. I think Dex was, at this point, still trying to work things out. I think he wasn't yet allowed back in, or he didn't have the courage to go back in after his big failure. And even when Dex does get back into the afterlife, he hides away in a back room, away from the whispers of those who know him for what he is. The last thing Dex needs is his new crew to see right through him. But try as Dex might, he cannot conceal his true self forever. Dex's meeting with V in that car was not just for getting a lay of the land. It was not for seeing how competent a fighter and a mercenary V is. Dex says that this meeting is so he can look into the eyes of the people that he's going to be working with, but Dex doesn't even remove his sunglasses. He hides in a fog of cigar smoke. Dex's main purpose here is to see if he can glean V's weaknesses, and to figure out how to turn them to his advantage. Dex's first attempt to appeal to V is through his quiet life or blaze of glory speech. This is meant to appeal to the baser, more status-obsessed image most new mercs in Night City tend to have. This approach is more effective when it comes to Jackie, feeding him just what he wants to hear as a young merc ready for his big break. V is more reserved and reluctant, tempered by the things that people like Vic have warned them about when it comes to Dexter. Dex then tries to wow V with his plan, and the fancy slideshow he uses to present the current situation. Dex tries to speak in a way that infers insider knowledge, or the power of his connections, even by his mention of having contacts in Pacifica. If you play Corpo V, you can actually make a well-informed remark on what Meredith Stout is up to after Dex mentions that she's peeking into Maelstrom. Dex responds to this clever deduction of V with encouragement on the surface, but I do think that Dex was mildly frustrated with V here. I think he was a little perturbed that V knew a bit more than he did. And I personally don't see V as being particularly wowed by technical aspects of this heist, but I think Corpo V especially would not be. Which directly contrasts with Jackie, who is impressed by a lot of flashier things. Dex also tries to use flattery to get into V's good graces, by doing the wink wink, nudge nudge, you're a better mercenary than him thing when it comes to Jackie. Dex is trying to sow some degree of division between his mercs. Perhaps to make it easier for him to get out of the heist, with most if not all the scratch. But Jackie falls head over heels with this job, and he's all in because Dex knows how to play him like a fiddle. As I detail in my video on Jackie, Jackie is a guy who wants nothing more than to provide and protect those he loves. Jackie wanted the wealth and the recognition that came with being a Night City legend, both to satisfy his own ego and also to help the people he cared about. Jackie's lived his whole life feeling like a nobody from Haywood, and it makes total sense that he would want all of these things to someday come true. You can see how well Dex binds Jackie's dream to his own ends. Jackie is quick to send Dex's regards if you choose to pull guns on Royce and his gangers when you go to get the flathead. Jackie also has excuses for every little thing that is mentioned against Dex throughout the story, because Jackie now has his own self-esteem tied to this heist. For Jackie to acknowledge any bit of fishiness, or to acknowledge that he might be being manipulated, that would suck. That would not feel good at all. As much as one can argue about how willfully blind Jackie is, because I think that is part of it, it is still dastardly and gross how Dex manipulates these starry-eyed solos. And by manipulating Jackie's loyalty, this is what ties V to the heist. V was ultimately in this heist because Jackie wanted it so badly. I think that if Jackie walked away, V would follow. V could tell something was off, but V was not going to leave Jackie alone in this. And I think that Dex quickly realized just how powerful their friendship was. I think that this is one major reason why Dex makes that percentage adjustment so quickly, after really barely any prodding on Jackie and V's part. Which, in and of itself, is a point to be suspicious of. A fixer like Rogue would say, don't like it, don't do the job, I'll find somebody else. Dex is far too accommodating here in a way that doesn't fit what we've heard about him. While I don't think Dex ever meant to actually give them a cut, I think that he made it look like he was going to because he was worried in that moment that he would lose Jackie. And then V right after, all right before the final game is about to be played. So, Dex risks looking a bit desperate here just to ensure his pawns stay loyal until the job's done. Dex's looking desperate here goes right over their heads, of course. The promise of a higher percentage, at the very least, might make these mercenaries more likely to come back. Which brings me to my next point. Delamain's role in this questline is a lot more layered than first meets the eye. The first layer of Delamain is almost like a spell. It's a spell meant to enthrall mercenaries like Jackie with the promise and flexing of wealth and power and luxury and all these things that they could ever dream of. I think Dex enjoyed flexing his own perceived wealth and power versus where his actual wealth and power was, in the gutter. Dex is a very smoke and mirrors kind of guy, so it does fit him, specifically making a big show to mask what the actual truth is. I actually think Dex is in dire straits when it comes to finances, and this next part is a total aside, so just bear with me. So I followed Dex after the meeting with V in the car, and He ended up parking one street over from the no-tell motel. Like, literally, you just cross the street, cross through an alley, and there you are. That could be entirely meaningless. I just thought that was very funny. This is all the evidence I need to prove to me that Dex is lying when he says the no-tell motel is just the escape house if things go badly. No, Dex just lives there. Maybe he thinks nobody will come looking for me here. I don't know. Anyway, this splurge of wealth on Delamain can also be seen as a sort of threat to V. While Jackie views it as awesome, V might see this, being the more canny of the two, as a show of resources and money that could be redirected to making Jackie and V's lives very difficult if they decide to stray from the plan at all. But the other most telling layer of Delamain is that he is a type of insurance. Dex does not trust the mercs that he's willing to throw under the bus, so having Delamain be programmed to return them to the no-tell motel, or wherever they would have met otherwise, is his way of ensuring his return. There's not even any wiggle room to go to a Ripper dock. There's no altering the itinerary of the Delamain, even in an emergency. Dex could paint this as a sort of safety precaution for Jackie and V, but that doesn't really hold up, all things considered. Dex and T-Bug were also discussing Excelsior as we entered their private room in the afterlife, and Excelsior has multiple meanings. Excelsior, first of all, is the Delamain package that Dex purchases for us to use during the heist. And I can't help but wonder if Dex and T-Bug planned that specific detail of the itinerary, as in it not being alterable whatsoever, as a way to ensure that they both got the relic. But again, that escapes into the T-Bug is a traitor theory, which another video. Another interesting thing about Excelsior is that it is a poem written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and it follows the story of a man who gets bedazzled by the promise of idealism, only to die, tragically, because of his pursuit of it. I believe it's pretty likely that T-Bug and Dex were referencing this poem, even with just the way that Dex says Excelsior. It fits the reading of the poem perfectly, at least how it sounds in my head, but I think that when Dex said Excelsior the way that he did, I think he was thinking of Jackie. Jackie is a lot like the guy from the poem. I think Dex is just savoring this idea of this manipulation going off without a hitch, too blind to see his own fate written between the lines of the prose. When it comes to the Flathead, Dexter ends up having his money wasted. This is because he paid in advance, which is a very risky thing to do, especially when it came to Maelstrom. Brick's own limited principles aside, the fact that Dex was willing to fork over 10,000 eddies without even seeing the Flathead in person, without even testing it, says a lot about how he's rushing to get into things. Dex is also just really petty. He's the kind of guy who would off someone just for saying the wrong thing about him, especially post-Pacifica disaster. Evelyn Parker identifies Dex as a lower-end fixer. She initially tried to get Rogue to take the heist job, but Rogue could tell it was a bad job to take. So Evelyn brought it to Dexter because, with her ear to the ground, she knew that he was desperate. She knew that Dex would assemble a team of people that he didn't have any stakes in, and Evelyn saw that as a good opportunity to get into the good graces of those mercenaries, so they would be more loyal to her than to him. And if you tell Dex about this at the Afterlife meeting, he laughs this off in a very bitter way. And Evelyn's perception of Dex, I think, cuts him really deep. And this has to do with what I think is Dex's already existing paranoia concerning not just Evelyn, but most people in the story. I think because Evelyn read Dex as well as she did, this frightened him. Dex is used to being the one who is good at reading people, and the fact that Dex couldn't quite put everything together on Evelyn on his own was intimidating for him, and I think he really glommed onto that. And even if his paranoia maybe was ultimately justified with Ev, considering her plans anyway, I don't think that Dex reached out to try and get more info on her because he had an actual substantial reason. I think it was just because he was uncomfortable with this feeling of not being in control. Evelyn was a lot smarter than he wished she was. Combine that with looking for threats everywhere except for within himself, and he is downright ready to take out anybody who makes him feel small or powerless or like he has a lack of control. Before we get into the finale of this analysis, I want to take a look at Dex's design. Right in the beginning of all of these quests, Misty warns Jackie to avoid mean reds. And of course, during the heist mission, as Jackie is fading as they escape Konpeki Tower, the lights are glowing a bloody red. But who else in this whole quest line is absolutely saturated with red in their design? Who, as someone in my comment section cleverly pointed out, looks at the world through rose-tinted glasses. Dex was a walking red flag right from the start. I also loved that rose-tinted glasses comment on another level, because Dex does spend the whole story refusing to see the reality that actually exists beyond his own lens. He refuses to see that even if this heist does succeed, when it comes to being found out or chased, Dex would never have made it that far. There's no way, especially with an item as desirable as the relic. It was insanely important to Arasaka, it was probably important to Netwatch, and it was probably important to virtually every other corporation in the world. Either way, wherever Dex turned, there were corporate interests looking in on him, and I think it's far more likely that they would find a way to get rid of him and steal the relic for themselves than it would have been for Dex to actually manage to sell it. I think Dex failed to measure the consequences of this job, and I think it would have caught up to him in the end. The Dex we see in the No-Tell Motel is the beast inside Mr. Cool, as he calls it. This is who berates us when we return from Konpeki Plaza. Before Dex mantles Mr. Cool one last time in getting V to go to the washroom. The manner in which Dex kills V is the greatest example of his own cowardice. Dex knows that to take care of V, V needs to be deceived and ambushed by Oleg. And this happens even if you don't go to the washroom. If you just stand there, you will still be attacked by Oleg. I think that this really proves the point that Dex is scared of V. When Dex shoots V at point blank and says that it's the quiet life for him after all, Dex is trying to paint his cowardice as strength to the one person who rightfully sees him entirely face to face for what he is. The capable merc with charm and skill and competence, someone who I'm sure Dex would have loved to have been, hates him with a passion, and can spend their last words reminding Dex how far he is from the guy Dex wishes he could be. But for Dex, the only reason he backs down to the idea of a quiet life is not because of sense, and it's not because he learned anything. It's because he failed again, and on a much higher scale this time. Dex's inability to bear the weight of his choices is best conveyed in his struggle to drag V's body out of a pile of garbage, if not by his tendency to cut and run without a solid plan. The nail in the coffin that really hits home for me, the fact that Dex didn't even learn anything from Pacifica, is the fact that Dex makes probably the exact same escape plan that he made 2 years ago. Just like last time, he's gonna go to space! Dex did not change at all. he did not grow. Dex is a character who plunks down in his developmental seat and refuses to undergo the uncomfortable friction of becoming better, of moving forward, all while the people of his past eventually, inevitably, walk right past him. Some of my favorite characters in fiction are the ones that refuse to develop, and you can see the difference in those versus the ones that do. And on another level, that's a struggle I think every human can relate to. I think that Dex really screwed himself over in scheduling that flight. His name was in the system, and Arasaka had skilled runners at their disposal. I can't quite prove it, but it would be ironic if Dex's escape attempt is what cuts his life as short as it is. I think Takemura, before Yorinobu tried to dispose of him, used every bit of Arasaka power at his disposal in order to hunt down any info on the heist, and I'm sure it didn't take him long to find Dex's name. When V sees Dexter after first coming back from the dead, who knows how long Takemura was ushering him around Night City. We don't even know what happened to Oleg, Dex's bodyguard, but I would like to think that Takemura cutting through that steely bodyguard like butter would be enough to make Dex fall apart. Because at this point, all we get is that beast inside Mr. Cool, and it's just a creature of cowardice and fear and just trying to stay alive. Dex's final moments are spent weakly bargaining for his life. He tries to find the weakness in this man with this almost alien creed. Those who sought fame and glory were Dex's bread and butter. He knew just what to say to them to get them to do what he wanted, because he also wanted those things too. But in meeting Takemura, Dexter, the disloyal, treacherous fixer, always out for himself, was finally faced with his antithesis, a man who was loyal to the grave, who would never forsake his oath, and whose word is one of the strongest in the game. Dex did not go out in a blaze of glory. He didn't get to live his quiet life. Instead, Dex was executed with a single bullet to the head, left to rot forgotten in a landfill, the last words of his final desperate bargain lost in a sea of rubbish. Thank you very, very much for watching this compilation of Cyberpunk character lore. If you enjoyed and want to see more, I regularly post a variety of story-focused videos on my channel, Cyberpunk 2077 foremost among them at this point in time. Thank you very much for watching Shaped by Stories, and I will see you again in the next one. Goodbye!